The buzzing is a constant companion now, a high-frequency thrum against my skull that vibrates through bone and seeps into the very marrow of my being. It's not just a sound, it's a presence, a living, breathing shroud of dread that presses against the cheap glass of my window. A million tiny chitinous bodies creating a roiling, black mass that blocks out the world. Sometimes, when the sun is particularly harsh, I catch glimpses of their grotesque forms through the writhing haze. Segmented bodies the size of my thumb, iridescent green stripes, and those impossible stalked eyes that seem to track my every move from beyond the warped pain. They know I'm here. They know I can see them. And the knowledge more than the noise is what's truly driving me to the ragged edge of what little sanity I have left. The air inside is thick with the scent of dust, fear, and something else. A cloying, sweet decay that suggests the walls themselves are weeping a slow, putrid dissolution. My go bag, once a symbol of escape, now sits beside me like a mocking monument to a failed flight. Its contents a paltry defense against an invisible, omnipresent enemy. I run my thumb over the worn leather of my wristwatch, the cold metal a small, futile anchor in the chaos. The hands haven't moved in what feels like an eternity, stuck just after 4. Funny, that time, it seems, has lost all meaning when you're waiting for the inevitable invasion of the real. It started, as these things always do for me, with a moment of shocking, clinical clarity. A sudden jolt back to life, only to find the world had decided to pull back its polite veil and show me its true, rotting face. Before all this, before the buzzing became the soundtrack to my slow descent into madness, there was the silence, the ringing, impossible silence of a world where the only thing that made sense was the searing pain behind my eyes and the fading echo of a truck's horn. Nothing special, just another statistic on a rain-slicked highway outside of what I still, mistakenly, called home. 1 minute, I was humming some half-forgotten tune, the taste of lukewarm coffee lingering on my tongue, the hum of my sedan a familiar lullaby. The next, a flash of white, a shriek of tortured metal, and then the world flipped, spun, and crumpled around me like a discarded piece of paper. The roof, designed to keep the weather out, became a blunt instrument, delivering a sharp final blow to my temple. I remember the sensation of impact, a sudden pressure that stole my breath. Then nothing. Absolute, profound nothing. They called it a miracle. I called it a damn inconvenience. 95 seconds, the doctors later told me. My heart had stopped. 95 seconds of absolute non-existence, a brief and blessed reprieve from the relentless grind. But no, the universe, in its infinite cruelty, decided I wasn't done suffering. The surgeons, bless their tireless hands, stitched me back together. My lungs, once a collapsed mess of punctured tissue, slowly reinflated. My legs, shattered like cheap ceramic, were put back into a semblance of order. Ribs, too many to count, were allowed to mend in their own agonizing time. 8 months. That's how long I spent floating in the silent abyss of a coma, a prisoner in my own shattered mind. They said I'd never wake up. Then they said I'd never walk. Every step of the way, I defied their dismal prognoses, not out of any heroic will to live, but out of a perverse, stubborn refusal to give up the ghost entirely. It was less triumph, more spite. Before all this, before the world decided I needed a peek behind the curtain, I dealt in brains, not in the operating theater, mind you. I was a neuroscientist. My days spent hunched over fMRI scans, trying to decipher the mysteries of the gray matter. My research focused on the curious phenomenon of synesthesia, those people whose senses bled into each other, tasting colors, smelling sounds. We were trying to prove that auras were just a fancy neurological interpretation of body language and mood, projected as visual stimuli. The irony, I've come to learn, is a cruel mistress. I used to laugh at the spiritualists, scoff at the psychics. Now, I'm living their nightmare. When they finally cut me loose from the hospital, still leaning on a cane like some ancient, forgotten patriarch, the world outside was an assault. The sterile white walls and the rhythmic beeping of machines had been my reality for nearly a year. Stepping into the raw, unfiltered cacophony of a city street felt like being struck by a physical wave. Horns blared like angry beasts, exhaust fumes clawed at my throat, and the sheer volume of human chatter was a dizzying, suffocating blanket. The taxi ride home was a blur of motion, colors and sounds that felt too loud, too bright, too much. My head throbbed with a persistent, dull ache, a constant reminder of the trauma nestled deep within my skull. My wife, bless her pragmatic heart, decided till death do us part had a surprisingly literal interpretation, particularly when that death lasted a mere 95 seconds. 8 months of my absence was apparently long enough for her to find a new, less comatose partner. I can't say I blamed her. Not entirely. The house we'd built together, a symbol of a life I'd barely remember, was sold off, split down the middle. My share, combined with a modest sick pay and state benefits, was enough to secure a small, impersonal flat. Barely enough furniture to call it lived in, and the refrigerator hummed with the mournful echo of its own emptiness. My savings dwindled like sand through cupped hands. My new reality was a cramped, beige box, stripped bare of everything but a few packed boxes of my old life, including my prized neuroscientist's coffee mug. I even had a nurse, Anita, a bright-eyed woman with a perpetual air of gentle concern, who specialized in both physiotherapy and mental health. She'd visit 3 times a week, a welcome if fleeting human connection in a world that was rapidly turning gray. Early on, I'd sleep 18 hours a day, the sheer effort of existing a monumental task. The thought of stepping outside for more than a few minutes would send a tremor of anxiety through me. Thank God for Deliveroo, the last bastion of convenience in my rapidly crumbling existence. Months bled into each other. The cane became an occasional prop, then a memory. The dizzy spells, once a constant companion, receded into unsettling whispers. I ventured out, first with Anita, then alone, navigating the supermarket aisles with the nervous energy of a startled deer. Eventually, I convinced my old department to let me come in, just for a day. I was still technically on their payroll, a phantom presence in the world of academia. My old desk, blessedly untouched, held a faded picture of my own brain scan, a memento from a time when my amygdala was still a loyal gatekeeper, not a shattered sieve. The amygdala, tiny little bastards, shaped like almonds, holding the keys to what we perceive as normal. For 2 decades, I'd studied them, understood their function. They filter the incomprehensible flood of sensory data, reducing it to manageable bits. See something threatening? Fight, flight, or freeze? See something familiar? Autopilot. Something new but non-threatening? Engage the frontal lobe, the thinking brain. My brain, post-crash, was apparently still running the pattern-matching algorithm, but the filter? The damn filter was gone. It was like living with 1,000 televisions blaring at once, all showing different, terrifying channels, and I couldn't change the damn station. My doctors, bless their well-meaning ignorance, thought I was making a solid recovery. I lied. Of course, neuroscientist, remember? I knew exactly what to tell them to keep them off my back, to ensure I retained what little autonomy I had left. The truth was, I could barely focus for more than half an hour, my vision constantly blurring at the edges, my thoughts fragmented. High doses of psychostimulants kept my frontal cortex limping along, and antipsychotics were supposed to dull the edges of my burgeoning panic. They did little more than confirm my suspicion that the medical community had no idea what was truly happening inside my head. I can tell you when it started, or at least when I first truly noticed when. It was a Thursday, Anita's weekly visit. The doorbell rang just after noon, a cheerful, metallic chime that used to signify a brief respite from my solitude. I opened the door, a practiced, weary smile on my face, ready for her usual assessment. And that's when I saw it. A maggot. It was impossibly, nauseatingly real. A fat, gray larva, easily 3 centimeters long, slowly, sensuously, wriggling on her right cheekbone, just beneath her eye. My breath hitched, my smile froze, contorted into something akin to horror. The thing moved with a lazy, deliberate rhythm, its segmented body shimmering with a slick, damp sheen. You've got something on your cheek." I managed, my voice a strangled croak. My eyes were locked onto the thing, a sick fascination warring with pure revulsion. Anita, bless her perpetually oblivious heart, just touched her face with a casual, almost disinterested gesture. "Oh," she murmured, and then, with a swipe of her hand, merely shifted the wriggling horror a centimeter to the side, where it continued its slow dance of decay. She glanced into the small, decorative mirror hanging in my hall, adjusted a stray strand of hair, and nodded, satisfied. "There, all better." "All better?" My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to grab her, to scrape the vile thing off her face. But the words, the actions, died on my tongue. She looked so utterly, completely normal. And I was the one seeing the impossible. The examination was a special kind of torture. Every minute dragged, punctuated by the faint, squirming movements of the larva on her face. I kept waiting for it to detach, to drop onto my pristine white sheets, to crawl onto my own skin. My gaze kept darting from her eyes, which were clear and untroubled, to the grotesque parasite that seemed to be feeding on her very essence. Half an hour crawled by, an eternity of silent dread, when she finally pronounced me coming along nicely, though your eyes are a little dilated. I nearly choked on a sarcastic laugh. My eyes. My heart was pounding like a drum solo. My palms were slick with cold sweat, and my stomach felt like a knot of barbed wire. If she had spent 30 minutes watching a maggot crawl on somebody's face, her eyes would be dilated too, and probably bugging right out of her skull. I could have dismissed it. Another hallucination, a trick of the mind. The rest of the day was blessedly quiet, the flat a sanctuary of normalcy, or at least what I perceived as normalcy. 10 hours awake, followed by that agonizing half hour of enforced social interaction, drained me completely. I went to bed, as I usually did after her visits, and fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep. Friday morning, the silence was back. No maggots, no strange visions. Maybe it was just a one-off, a side effect, a symptom of lingering brain damage. A part of me, the old, rational Leo, clung to that, but another part, the newly awakened, terrified part, urged caution. I decided I needed a change from my usual bland, delivered food. A local convenience store, a mere 10-minute walk, promised fresh air and a distraction. As I approached, I braced myself for the tinny jingle of the bell above the door, a sound that had always annoyed me even before my brain decided to fracture. I wasn't braced for the smell. It hit me like a physical blow the moment the door swung inward, a wave of putrid, cloying sweetness, heavy with the scent of decay and something indefinably chemical. My stomach lurched. I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth, the taste of stale bile bitter on my tongue. I fought for composure, forcing myself to take shallow, controlled breaths through my mouth. The air itself felt thick, coated. I shuffled past the empty aisles, the fluorescent lights humming with an unsettling frequency, towards the cereal. That, at least, seemed untouched. I grabbed a box of Frosties, the cheerful tiger on the box a jarring contrast to the stench. Then I turned toward the fruit section, and the source of the overwhelming putrefaction became horrifyingly clear. Every piece of fruit in the display was rotten, not just slightly overripe, but utterly, unbelievably corrupted. The bananas were black, soft, and weeping a viscous, dark fluid. Apples and oranges were covered in thick, furry blankets of gray and green mold, the fuzz moving almost imperceptibly in the stale air. It was a still life of decomposition, a vibrant, terrifying tableau of entropy. "Helen!" I called out, my voice raspy, to the elderly woman behind the counter. "Helen, what's up with the fruit?" Helen, a woman whose face was a map of benevolent wrinkles, looked up, a faint smile on her lips. "What do you mean, dear?" "It's rotten," I stated, the word hanging heavy in the fetid air. "All of it, it's crawling with mold." She ambled out, her movements slow and deliberate, and peered into the fruit bin. She picked up a few unidentifiable blobs from behind a handwritten sign that optimistically proclaimed them to be fresh apples. She turned them over in her gnarled hands, her expression unchanging, completely oblivious to the soft, squishy give of the rotten flesh, the faint, acrid smell I could practically see wafting from them. "Yeah," she said, her voice completely devoid of concern. "I'll chuck these. Bring whatever you want to the counter. I'll check them for you." I only bought the cereal and a bottle of cheap antiseptic mouthwash. The smell, the sight, haunted me. I spent the next few days holed up in my flat, reading neuroscience papers, short bursts, no more than an hour at a time, my head still throbbing with the effort. My Netflix backlog, which had been shamefully extensive even before my forced hiatus from life, provided a blessed, if temporary, escape. No subtitles, though. My brain still couldn't parse that much visual information at once. As Thursday approached, a knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. Last week had been bad. This week, I feared, would be worse. Anita, bless her unerring punctuality, rang the doorbell just after noon. I took a deep, shaky breath, straightened my shirt, and forced myself to open the door. No maggots. You've got to try to find the positives in life, right? But the relief was fleeting, immediately replaced by a different kind of horror. Anita's usual light blue NHS uniform, typically starched and pristine, was now dark, ragged, and stained in places I didn't want to contemplate. It looked as if she'd been dragged through a muddy, thorny bush, her skin beneath the fabric showing hints of dark, mottled discoloration. But that wasn't the worst of it. Around her, pulsating softly, was what I could only describe as an outline, a fuzzy, shifting black shadow that clung to her like a second skin, vibrating with an unseen energy. I'd studied auras, of course, in my old life, the supposed visual manifestations of a person's energy. I'd read countless first-hand accounts, but none of them had ever mentioned the overwhelming sense of dread, the icy, creeping tendrils of cold that seemed to emanate directly from the shadowy shroud. It was a palpable weight in the air, a presence that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. "Anita," I started, my voice tight, trying to sound casual, trying to ignore the pulsing darkness. I'm not feeling so great today. Maybe we should reschedule." She merely smiled, that same gentle, unwavering smile, and walked straight past me into the flat. "Nonsense, Leo. This will only take a few minutes, and if you're not feeling well, it's all the more important I do a proper checkup." Her tone was light, dismissive, as if she were talking to a recalcitrant child. I wish, with every fiber of my being, that I could say that half hour was the most stressful time of my life. It was close. Every minute stretched, an agonizing eternity of forced proximity to the anomaly. Anita proceeded with her usual routine, taking my biometrics, asking the mundane questions about my sleep and appetite. All the while, the black aura around her shifted and pulsed, its edges blurring and sharpening, like something half seen in a dream. My scientific mind, stubborn even in the face of terror, kicked in. I forced myself to observe. The pulsations were rhythmic, roughly in time with a heartbeat, though not my own, which was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Her heartbeat, I assumed. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as parts of the shadow flipped outward, forming thin, whip-like tendrils that flailed erratically in the air. Once, one brushed against my arm, and I recoiled, a shiver of profound, bone-deep cold racing through me. It wasn't just a visual distortion, it was a physical sensation. When she finally left, still cheerful, still oblivious, still trailing that malevolent shroud, I retreated to my bedroom, pulling the flimsy door shut behind me. I turned on Netflix, the familiar drone of a sitcom, a desperate attempt to drown out the ringing in my ears. The vivid, horrifying image burned into my retina. I wasn't really watching. A plan, nebulous and terrifying, began to form in the corners of my mind. I was a scientist. Damn it. I observed, I experimented, I collected data, and I had a hypothesis. I didn't leave the house for days. I devoured every scrap of information I could find on auras, the legitimate scientific papers, the fringe theories, the spiritual mumbo-jumbo I'd always dismissed as bunk. Everything. I meticulously cross-referenced the side effects of my medication, the reported interactions of the specific cocktail they had me on. Very little, the research suggested, pointed to anything remotely resembling what I was seeing. And then, the idea, born of desperation and a dark, clinical curiosity, solidified. What if my specific biology, my unique brain injury, combined with this precise medication regimen, was having an unprecedented, horrific effect? What if it was hiding something? So I stopped. I wasn't stupid. I tapered off, half doses for 2 days, then a quarter, then an eighth, then nothing. I didn't consult the doctors. I knew what they'd say. Delusions, psychosis, hospitalization. I wasn't ready for that. My headaches, which had been dulled by the meds, returned with a vengeance, a constant, dull throb behind my eyes. Paracetamol, the mundane soldier of analgesia, offered little more than a whisper of relief. A couple of weeks later, after enduring 2 more visits from a progressively more disturbing Anita, her aura thicker, more defined, and now, alarmingly, accompanied by a swarm of flies that seemed to orbit her head like tiny, buzzing satellites, I finally ventured out. It was a Wednesday, early afternoon. The streets were quiet, blessedly devoid of the usual rush. I took a deep breath, clutching my old, worn leather jacket tighter around me, a useless shield against an unseen enemy. The world, it turns out, is a far uglier place than we let ourselves believe. The familiar houses, the neat rows of trees, the mundane street furniture, they were all there, but twisted, decayed, corrupted. The trees were skeletal, their few remaining leaves brittle and crusted with thick, gray fungus. Trunks were split open, weeping a viscous, black sap, while grotesque, mushroom-like growths erupted from their rotting insides. They looked less like living organisms and more like the mummified remains of something ancient and terrible. The road signs, once crisp and clear, were faded to illegibility, the metal corroded by a rampant, cancerous rust. The road itself was a patchwork of cracks and potholes, not filled with water, but with a viscous, dark liquid that shimmered with an oily, unnatural sheen. It looked like mud, but it moved with an unsettling, almost deliberate sluggishness, like some primordial ooze. I definitely didn't want to test its properties by touching it. The houses, once so ordinary, were decrepit husks. Many leaned precariously, their foundations seemingly crumbling beneath them. One, marked with a faded "To Let" sign, had its roof completely caved in, a gaping maw revealing darkness within. The incongruity was sickening. One house, inexplicably, was freshly painted, a vivid, almost neon green. The clash between the pristine, vibrant paint and the rotting, collapsed structure beneath it was an assault on my eyes, making my already aching head throb harder. Even then, as I watched, the fresh paint seemed to ripple, bubbling and peeling in tiny, almost imperceptible flakes. If it weren't for that one jarring splash of color, the street could have easily been mistaken for a set from a post-apocalyptic movie. Left derelict after the credits rolled, a sudden, chilling thought occurred to me. I stumbled back into my apartment, grabbed my phone, and fumbled with the camera app. I took a photo of the street, the same decaying panorama I now saw with terrifying clarity. I stared at the screen. On the phone. Everything looked normal. The trees were green, the houses sturdy, the road unblemished. My heart hammered. One of them was lying to me. But which one? I turned, my gaze falling upon my own apartment, my supposed sanctuary. The walls I now saw were not pristine white, but a patchwork of crumbling plaster and damp, spreading moss. A multitude of spiderweb-like cracks snaked across the ceiling, dark lines hinting at structural instability. The smell of decay, which I dismissed earlier as the grocery store's lingering miasma, was undeniably present here too. A pervasive, musty tang that hinted at something insidious growing beneath the floorboards, within the very fabric of the building. Our brains are immensely powerful, capable of processing far more information than a mere phone camera. I believed, with a cold certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my eyes were seeing the world as it truly was, and my brain, now, was no longer capable of filtering that input, of presenting me with the polite, comforting lie of accepted reality. The specific damage I'd sustained, the 95 seconds of clinical death, had ripped away the veil. I could very well be the first person to suffer this precise trauma and survive, with my mental faculties otherwise intact. Or perhaps there were others, locked away in psychiatric institutions, their terrified screams dismissed as the ravings of madness. I swore then and there that I would not join them. I would understand this. I would fight it. I was a scientist. I experimented. I observed. I collected data. So that's exactly what I did. That afternoon, armed with my phone, a battered notebook, and a small clipboard, vestiges of a former life, I walked into town without the helpful, deceptive filtering my amygdala used to provide. The world was a canvas of horrifying detail. I passed a few people on the way to the shopping center, each a grotesque study in what lay beneath the human facade. All of them were surrounded by those shadowy auras, now more defined, more vivid. They clung to the people like bizarre, ill-fitting spacesuits, their edges blurring and sharpening, their shapes fluctuating like disturbed smoke. From the other side of the street, I instinctively kept my distance, a primal urge to avoid contact. I could make out dark, translucent tendrils snaking from these auras. But the more I looked, the more the horrifying truth became clear. They weren't coming out of the people. They were going into them, burrowing into skin, into clothing, disappearing as if the very fabric of reality offered no resistance. When I reached the shopping center, a crumbling edifice of what I once considered modern architecture, I found a rarely used bench, far enough away to observe, close enough to see the details. It was nearly 4 o'clock. The lunch rush long past. I made a mental note to leave before 5, to avoid the hordes of afternoon shoppers. I tried taking photos, but again, the phone lied. Every picture came out normal, a flat, unblemished representation of a world that no longer existed for me. The camera wasn't going to help, so I sketched, a habit born out of a forgotten evening class years ago, now resurrected as a desperate attempt to process the horror. I drew the people, their faces ordinary, their movements mundane, but always, always, those shadowy auras around them. After 5 or 6 hurried sketches, I paused, flipping back through the pages, searching for a pattern. The tendrils were everywhere, worming their way into people's bodies with insidious grace. But they seemed disproportionately concentrated on two areas: the heart and the head, the seat of our emotions and the seat of our thoughts, the source of our lifeblood and the source of our perception. It was early April, and I'd been vaguely surprised by the sheer number of flies buzzing around the people I sketched. I hadn't given them much thought, dismissing them as a seasonal annoyance. Now, as I studied my sketches, a new, unsettling detail emerged. The flies were everywhere. They danced around the auras, occasionally landing on a shoulder, a head, a hand, then taking flight again. I shifted my focus, sketching the dilapidated buildings, the patches of moss and mold on the road, the abysmal state of the cars that crawled by. Everything was decaying. Everything was wrong. Around 4:30, the shadows lengthening, I got up and began the walk home. The shopping center was due west of my flat, so the sun had been in my eyes on the way there. It was therefore something of a surprise and another jolt to my already frayed nerves to see a second sun on my walk back. No, not the sun. Not the familiar yellow orb I was used to. This one was smaller, perhaps half the size, and a deep, angry red. It hung in the sky like a malevolent eye, a blood orange against the fading azure. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, and turned back. Our usual yellow sun was still there, in its proper place, a reassuring beacon of normalcy that now seemed utterly alien. If I'd seen this in the past, I would have been shocked, bewildered, convinced I was hallucinating. But that day, it was just another bit of weirdness, another layer of the grotesque unveiled. Had it always been there? Always lurking just beyond the edge of human perception? And I'd simply never been able to see it before? I sketched the two suns, quickly, frantically, before continuing my journey home, my mind reeling. No further strange things happened on the way back, a small mercy I hardly noticed. The inside of my flat, once a dreary, empty box, was now a welcome change from the horrifying landscape outside. It was small, just a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. And I'd kept up with the cleaning, or so I thought. Now, I saw the truth. The walls, once a soothing cream, were blotched with spreading patches of mold and damp, like weeping sores. The wooden furniture, cheap and flimsy, was softening, rotting from within, its surfaces slick with a faint, iridescent sheen, strange cracks, like spiderwebs spun by an invisible, malevolent arachnid, spread across the plaster. The kitchen, once sterile, now reeked of something foul, a pervasive, sweet stench of decomposition. I spent hours methodically throwing away every scrap of moldy food, every open container, every perishable item. I ordered a mountain of canned goods, ultra-processed foods sealed away from the rot, and, crucially, loads of bottled water, the tap water. I now saw was brackish and tinted a disturbing shade of brown. Anita arrived right on schedule the next day, her cheerful demeanor utterly at odds with the horrifying spectacle she presented. I didn't know if the shadowy aura was stronger or if my perceptions had simply sharpened even further. I counted 3 maggots now, one still wriggling lazily on her right cheek, another embedded in her hairline, and a third, newly arrived, nestled in the damp strands of her hair above her ear. The flies, now more numerous, buzzed around her head in a constant, agitated cloud, occasionally settling on her hair or shoulders before taking flight again. As she poked and prodded, her sterilized gloves a thin, useless barrier. I kept my eyes tightly closed, grateful only for the fact that I didn't have to look at the maggots, didn't have to watch the flies dance around the edges of her aura. The stench, however, was inescapable. 20 minutes felt like an eternity, my stomach churning with the effort of not gagging. "You seem physically fine, Leo," she said, her voice light, oblivious to my internal torment, but emotionally agitated. "No shit," I thought, bile rising in my throat. I mumbled some agreement, some excuse about stress, just to get her to finish and leave. She arranged an impatient appointment for the next week. Concerned about my emotional state, I agreed, of course, with absolutely no intention of ever stepping foot in that hospital again. The thought of being confined, powerless, while the world decayed around me, was a far greater terror than anything she could imagine. The TV, thankfully, still worked. Whatever reality held, it mercifully didn't translate to the screen. I spent the rest of the day immersed in Netflix and YouTube, desperately clinging to the manufactured semblance of normality, the bright, unblemished pixels a temporary balm for my tortured mind. The next day, I made an appointment with my GP. If I'd been taking my medication as prescribed, it would have been weeks before I could get in. But when you claim your antipsychotics have run out and you're feeling agitated, suddenly the medical world snaps to attention. I drove to the surgery under the twin gaze of the two suns, the yellow and the angry red, a grotesque celestial pairing. I stayed in my car until the very last moment, clinging to the illusion of safety, before steeling myself and stepping out. My doctor was, miraculously, running on time. I was ushered into his office by a receptionist whose skin seemed to barely cling to the underlying bone structure of their face, their eyes sunken hollows in a gaunt landscape. I sat down opposite a short, balding man in a white coat, or what I thought was supposed to be a white coat. It was a tapestry of stains and discoloration, a grim testament to either years of neglect or a few days of unspeakable filth. I wondered which. The doctor, a man named Dr. Evans, asked the usual questions, his voice a low, comforting rumble. I answered them with a practiced ease, weaving a believable narrative of agitation and anxiety, just enough to justify my presence without raising too many red flags. But a refill wasn't why I was there. I wanted to study another person up close, outside the confines of my increasingly compromised flat, away from the disturbing presence of Anita, and, perhaps, if things went south, I felt safer in a public place where I could, theoretically, flee. He had the usual aura I'd come to expect, a dark, shifting shroud that pulsed around him like a sickly heartbeat. As he spoke, I watched, transfixed, as the tendrils of shadow snaked about him, occasionally burrowing into his skin as though it offered no resistance, vanishing into his flesh. His skin, I now saw, was blemished and scarred in ways I hadn't noticed before. A roadmap of festering sores and discolored patches. And his face, though his expression was kind, bled sluggishly from two open, weeping sores on his cheek and chin. Several flies, the same unnaturally large, agitated specimens I'd seen around Anita, buzzed around him, dipping into and out of the black aura, dragging wisps of it with them as they moved. After satisfying himself with my answers, Dr. Evans turned to his computer, tapping away at the keyboard. This was my chance. I pulled out my notebook and pencil, the familiar weight of them comforting in my trembling hands, and began to sketch one of the flies. They were large, far larger than any housefly I'd ever seen, easily 4 or 5 centimeters across. And the more I looked, the more it became terrifyingly clear. They didn't quite look like flies at all. I sketched quickly, meticulously, trying to capture every detail. They had black bodies, striped with an iridescent, sickly green. 4 wings, not 2, beat with a rapid, almost liquid motion. I'm no entomologist, but I knew that insects had 6 legs. These had only 4. But then, as I studied them closer, a horrifying realization hit me. They did have 6 limbs, 4 legs for locomotion, and 2 grasping limbs at the front, tipped with tiny, wicked-looking claws. These things were capable of holding small objects. My blood ran cold. But what truly threw me, what sent a surge of pure primal terror through my veins, what led me to bolt from the doctor's office without a word, without a prescription, was what happened next. Two of the flies landed on my notebook. They perched there, silent, unnervingly still, and then, impossibly, their stalked, orb-like eyes seemed to swivel, focusing on the sketch I had made. They seemed to study it, their tiny heads tilting. Then they started buzzing, or to be more precise, they'd been buzzing all along, a constant, low hum that I had, until now, dismissed as background noise. But now, they buzzed in what, to me, sounded a lot like communication. Insect buzzing comes from the wings flapping in flight, but I heard it distinctly, resonating from the two silent, unmoving creatures on my notebook. A language, a dialogue. Then, with a sudden, synchronized movement that made the hairs on my arms stand on end, they rose up, joining the other flies that had been orbiting Dr. Evans. 10, perhaps 11 of them, now hovered half a meter from my face, a terrifying, sentient cloud, and they were all looking at me and buzzing to each other. They'd been content to ignore me until then, to treat me as another oblivious, two-legged creature in a world they silently dominated. But now they knew. They knew that I could see them. I ran, and without a word, without a backward glance, I scrambled out of the doctor's office, through the waiting room, and out into the putrefying street. I fumbled with my keys, yanked open the car door, and threw myself into the driver's seat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tearing away from the curb with a screech of tires. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just drove, as fast as the corrupted roads would allow. The image of those knowing stalked eyes burned into my mind. I reached my flat, the familiar, decaying facade, a desperate beacon, and raced inside, slamming the door shut, fumbling for the locks. Panic, cold and sharp, spurred me into action. I began to seal myself in. Clothes, towels, anything I could find, were jammed against the door frame. Duct tape, a relic from a previous, more mundane existence, was ripped from its roll and slapped across the air vents, covering every crevice, every potential point of entry. I moved with a frenzied, desperate energy, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the smell of damp and mold suddenly overwhelming in the enclosed space. When a person runs out of their doctor's surgery in terror, it's only normal for there to be some follow-up. And when that person also claims their antipsychotic medication has run out, it turns out the follow-up comes with a police escort. 2 hours later, a polite yet firm knocking came from my door. 2 officers, their faces bland, unblemished, and mercifully fly-free, stood on my porch. I spoke to them through the smeared, warped glass of my living room window, concocting a plausible story of anxiety and stress. I convinced them I wasn't an immediate danger to myself or others, and after a few more perfunctory questions, they left to make their report, their patrol car a distant hum as it receded down the street. Their flies, however, did not. A dozen or so of the grotesque insects, their bodies vibrating with an unnerving intensity, hovered just outside my window, their chitinous forms black silhouettes against the dying light. They dragged the shadow aura with them, tracing thick, oily lines of it through the air as they flew, like ethereal contrails. I watched, my heart sinking, as some of them disappeared. Assumed at first that they were trying to find another way in. A loose pane, a crack in the wall. No such luck. Shortly after those few vanished from sight, 100 more materialized. A silent, terrifying reinforcement. Then hundreds, then thousands. And this, I fear, is where my story ends. My dwindling supply of canned food and bottled water should last me a week, maybe 2, at most. I live almost entirely in my bedroom now, venturing out only for the desperate necessity of the toilet, or to re-secure the gaps where the flies have been trying to tunnel in. their buzzing a furious, relentless assault against the makeshift barriers. Between the sheer number of flies, their writhing bodies pressed against the glass, and the thick, inky shadow trails they leave in the air. I can barely see anything outside, just the sickly yellow light filtering through during the day, a pale ghost of sunshine, and the ominous, blood-red glow of the evening sun, a twin beacon of my inescapable nightmare. I can barely sleep, partly because I live in a state of constant, gnawing fear, and partly because the buzzing, the ceaseless, overwhelming drone of thousands, tens of thousands of flies, is a cacophony that drowns out all thought, all hope. So with nothing else to do, no escape, no solace, I'm putting my account to the internet, as if that will do any good. The best I can hope for now, the most merciful end, is that I run out of food, that thirst and starvation claim me before they do. I don't want to know what happens to me if they get in while I'm still alive. Character count 99987. The world was a blinding, screaming inferno. Not the kind that devoured wood and flesh, but the kind that ate at the edges of my perception. A roaring, white-hot agony behind my eyes. My face felt like a canvas for a particularly sadistic abstract artist. Each brushstroke a molten lash, each color a new shade of unholy pain. My hands, surprisingly, were free, but utterly useless, batting at the air as if trying to swat away the very concept of suffering. My lungs burned with a futile, gurgling sound that was supposed to be a scream, but came out as a strangled sob, slick and hot with something I instinctively knew was not sweat. Just moments ago, I'd been trapped, bound, but now I was free to burn. Great. Another stellar decision in a long line of them. This was the crescendo of a truly terrible symphony, one that had been playing subtly for weeks, gathering its gruesome instruments, and now, finally, unleashing its full, ear-splitting horror. It had started, as most of my disasters did, with a momentary lapse in judgment, a fleeting, misguided attempt at normalcy that curdled into something monstrous. I was supposed to be keeping a low profile, drifting from one anonymous gig to the next, a ghost in the machine of the American interstate. But then, there was Hannah. I'd met her through a short-term security gig at a high-end art gallery, an assignment that required me to stay put for a few weeks, something I usually avoided. She was the gallery owner's daughter, all sharp angles and carefully curated beauty, like a sculpture herself. Hair spun gold, eyes the color of polished mahogany, a laugh that tinkled like shattered glass, and beneath it all, a hollow hunger for adoration that I, in my cynical observational way, had spotted instantly. My weary mind, for some reason, had seen it as a puzzle to be solved, or perhaps, in a moment of profound weakness, a small, quiet corner of the world where I might just rest. That was my fatal flaw, wasn't it? The reluctance to simply walk away, to let the world burn without me. My cynical fatalism was often offset by a nagging conscience, a perverse need to fix things, or at least comment on their brokenness. This time, it led me to Hannah's orbit. We'd fallen into a toxic, glittering parody of a relationship. It wasn't love, not really. On my part, it was a weary fascination, a detached observation of a woman so utterly consumed by surface-level validation that it became a horror in itself. For her, I was an accessory, another gleaming trinket to polish her already blinding image. I was a novelty, an unreadable man she couldn't quite categorize, which, to her, was an intriguing challenge. For weeks, I'd watched her preen, her entire existence revolving around her reflection, around the breathless compliments of the sycophants who orbited her. It was exhausting. The sheer performative effort required to maintain her perfect facade. She'd constantly needle me, small, barbed comments about her perceived superiority, Her winning lottery ticket, looks that she'd somehow deigned to bestow upon a man like me. "Don't you think you're punching above your weight, honey?" She'd coo, often in front of company, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, her gaze daring me to contradict her. Most people would laugh, embarrassed or agree. I usually just offered a non-committal grunt, my hand unconsciously going to the old battered wristwatch on my left wrist, tracing the cool metal of its casing. A nervous tick, a grounding mechanism, a silent plea for the minutes to hurry up and rescue me from the charade. The watch itself was a relic, the face scratched, the leather strap worn smooth. It kept time, yes, but its true purpose was a constant reminder of the relentless forward march of moments, even when trapped in a temporal eddy of someone else's ego. But one night, after a particularly insufferable charity gala, where she'd practically pole danced for compliments in a dress cut so low it defied gravity, my patience, thin to begin with, finally snapped. We were back in her cavernous, tastefully sterile apartment, the kind of place where every cushion seemed to hold its breath. I was nursing a glass of cheap whiskey I'd found hidden behind the expensive single malts, the amber liquid doing little to dull the grating edge of her constant self-aggrandizement. "Honestly, Leo," she'd begun, swirling her champagne, catching the light on her perfectly manicured nails. "Sometimes I wonder what I ever saw in you. You're adequate, I suppose." She paused, expecting a reaction, a flicker of insecurity, a desperate plea for reassurance. It was a game, a sick, twisted game. I just stared at her, the ice in my glass melting, condensing, leaving a faint ring on the polished mahogany coffee table. I saw the desperate need in her eyes, a kind of frantic, empty abyss that even endless compliments couldn't fill. My observational skills, usually my armor, sometimes became a weapon, or at least a self-destructive impulse. My internal monologue, a constant companion of cynical commentary, sometimes slipped out. "Adequate, huh?" I mused, the words flat, heavy. I took a slow sip of the whiskey, letting the burn spread. "You know, Hannah, I've seen a lot of things in my time. A lot of pretty packaging covering empty boxes. A lot of people so obsessed with the reflection in the glass they forget there's a whole world outside it." I paused, letting my gaze drift from her flawless face to the expensive, abstract painting on the wall behind her. "Frankly, I think we're about even. If we're judging by what's actually there." The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to absorb the very air. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant wail of a city siren, the frantic beating of my own heart against my ribs. Her smile, fixed and perfect, didn't falter for a beat. Then, very slowly, her eyes narrowed. The champagne flute, clutched in her hand, vibrated almost imperceptibly. "Excuse me?" Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper, like glass shards rubbing together. "You heard me," I said, my voice betraying none of the internal tremors. "You're so busy polishing your own superficiality. You've forgotten how to actually be a person, how to connect. We're even because you're as hollow as you are pretty. And I'm just me. No frills, no performance, just a guy trying to get through the night without choking on someone else's ego." That was it. The pin had been pulled, her face contorted, the mask of perfect beauty fracturing. The glass of champagne flew, shattering against the wall next to my head, the liquid spraying my cheek like icy shrapnel. "You arrogant, ungrateful bastard!" she shrieked, the sound raw, visceral, completely unlike her usual modulated tones. "How dare you? How dare you diminish me? I am beautiful. I am perfect. And you're nothing. You're a shadow, a speck of dust. You're ugly. You're damaged." The last word hit me with a chilling familiarity, not from her, but from a past I kept buried. Damaged. It was a phantom whisper from a locked room, the scent of burning wood and ozone clinging to the edges of my memory. I pushed the thought down, clamping down on the cold dread that always accompanied it. My fists clenched, my nails digging into my palms. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, letting her rage wash over me, a tidal wave of insecurity and entitlement. She tore through the apartment like a hurricane in a silk dress, screaming, smashing, her golden hair a wild halo around her distorted face. A vase of white lilies exploded against the fireplace. A porcelain figurine, a delicate dancer, shattered on the marble floor. Furniture was overturned, cushions ripped, a priceless antique clock sent flying. I watched, my face impassive, my mind already calculating exit strategies, noting the location of her phone, the layout of the apartment, the weight of the coffee table if I needed to use it as a shield. Years of being perpetually on the edge, always ready to run, had honed these instincts into a sharpened blade. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This was an unfolding threat. "Fine," she finally screamed, her voice hoarse, tears streaming down her face, mixing with mascara. "We're even. You want to be equal? You're the window dressing and the main breadwinner. Leo, congratulations. You're the whole damn show. But you know what? That's not what I want. I want to be the light. I want to be more. And I will be." With that, she stormed into the bedroom, the heavy oak door slamming shut with a bone-jarring thud that echoed through the now silent apartment. The air, thick with the scent of shattered glass and expensive perfumes, still crackled with her fury. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on my watch, the seconds ticking by with an almost painful slowness. The rational part of my brain screamed, "Get out, now. This is the moment. Run, don't look back." But the stubborn, self-destructive fragment of my conscience, the one that always sought closure or, worse, a futile attempt at resolution, held me rooted. It was almost dawn. Maybe, just maybe, the cold light of day would extinguish her madness. I spent the rest of the night in the guest room, a small, clinical space with a bed too soft and a window overlooking a concrete courtyard. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, had me on edge. I kept my go bag, the packed duffel with the cash, flashlight, and a change of clothes within arm's reach. Sleep was a restless, fitful thing, haunted by vague, shifting shadows and the acrid smell of smoke that wasn't there. The cold dread that had settled in my gut was a familiar companion, a phantom limb of my hidden past. It was the same cold dread that whispered of other nights, other escapes, other things I'd seen that no one should. The next morning, the apartment was eerily quiet, too quiet. The debris from her rampage had been meticulously cleaned. No shattered glass, no overturned furniture, not even a faint scent of the expensive perfume that had filled the air. It was as if the explosion of the night before had been a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. My hands, calloused and scarred from years of manual labor, went to my wristwatch, checking the time that seemed to crawl. I found Hannah in the kitchen, sitting at the pristine breakfast counter, sipping coffee. She looked immaculate, dressed in a silk robe, her golden hair perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Her face, pale and composed, was a mask of serene indifference. She didn't look up as I entered, the faint scent of coffee and something sharp, almost chemical, hanging in the air. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice, or to my own annoyance, a meek whisper against the vast silence. It sounded like a plea, and I hated myself for it. She slowly finished her coffee, set the cup down with a soft clink that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet, then rose. She tossed the empty cup into the sink, the porcelain making a hollow sound as it hit the stainless steel. Without a single word, without even a flicker of acknowledgement in her polished eyes, she glided out of the room. The air she left behind felt colder, thinner. Over the next few days, the silence stretched, taut and brittle as old glass. But it wasn't peaceful. It was a watchful silence, a predator's stillness. I'd catch her staring at me, her brown eyes unnervingly blank. Whenever she thought I wasn't looking, I'd be in the shower, the steam hot on my skin, and the bathroom door would slowly, silently, shiver open a crack. I'd snap off the water, the sudden silence deafening, and shout, "Hello." Only the hum of the ventilation fan answered. No footsteps, no retreating shadow, nothing. In the dead of night, I'd hear faint floorboards squeak in the hall outside the guest room, a whisper of movement, a breath held. I'd flick on the bedside lamp, the sudden burst of light jarring, and scramble to my feet. But by the time my eyes adjusted, the hall would be empty, bathed in the sickly glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. The house, immense and silent, seemed to breathe around me, a living entity that watched and waited. I told myself it was my paranoia, years of living on the run, of seeing things that weren't there, of being hunted by shadows. I tried to rationalize it. She was angry. She was playing mind games. She was just Hannah. But the truth, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, was undeniable. I was terrified of my own girlfriend. The man who'd faced down worse things than a scorned woman, who could still bench 220 pounds on a good day, was tiptoeing past the master bedroom, jumping at his own reflection in the hallway mirror. It was ridiculous. It was pathetic. And if any of my old contacts caught wind of it, they'd laugh me off the grid. So, rather than pack my go bag and vanish into the night, which was my every instinct, I did something monumentally stupid. I decided to fix it, to appease the monster. It was that damn reluctant conscience again, that nagging voice that insisted on engaging, on seeing things through. Even when every fiber of my being screamed for escape, I bought a ludicrously expensive bouquet of long-stem red roses, the kind of gesture I usually scoffed at. I marched myself to the master bedroom door, my hand going to my wristwatch, my thumb tracing the crown. 3 deep breaths. Then, I opened the door. Hannah was in bed, propped up against a mountain of pillows, engrossed in a fashion magazine. She didn't look up immediately. The air in the room was cloying, heavy with the scent of lilies and something else, something sharp and metallic, almost like ozone. My gut twisted. This was wrong. All wrong. "Hannah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I was wrong." I held out the roses, a ridiculous peace offering. You're truly beautiful, more breathtaking than the first day of summer. Every time we stand next to each other, I feel like some kind of evolutionary mistake. People must wonder if my parents were related." The words felt like ash in my mouth, a betrayal of my own cynicism, a forced performance of the role she wanted me to play. She slowly lowered the magazine, her eyes dark and unblinking, fixed on me. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took the roses, her fingers brushing mine, cold and dry. Then, without a word, she pulled back the silken bedsheets, inviting me in. What was I supposed to do? Wait for a damn smoke signal? My internal alarm bells were screaming, but my feet, propelled by that perverse desire for resolution, moved. I climbed into bed, a desperate, pathetic hope flickering in my chest that this ugly chapter, this terrifying interlude, might finally be closed. The next morning, I woke to the scent of something acrid, stinging. My vision was blurry, swimming in a gray haze. My head was pounding, a dull, insistent throb. And then I realized my hands and feet were bound, not with rope, not with anything soft. Metal cuffs on a cold and unforgiving secured my wrists and ankles to the ornately carved posts of the bed. They chafed against my skin, the raw metal biting into my flesh. A wave of ice-cold panic, sharp and immediate, washed over me, chasing away the remnants of sleep. This wasn't a bad dream. This was real, and it was worse than anything I'd conjured in my nightmares. Above me, straddling my chest, sat Hannah. She was wearing a translucent face mask, the kind you'd see in a spa. But it wasn't for beauty. It was an impermeable barrier, a plastic shroud. Her hands, gloved in surgical latex, held a glass container filled with a clear, viscous liquid. The pungent, chemical aroma that had been stinging my nostrils intensified, making my eyes water, catching in the back of my throat. It smelled like industrial cleaner, like something meant to strip paint. My stomach lurched. "I've been mulling over what you said." Hannah's voice was calm, almost conversational, devoid of the previous night's fury. "And you were right, Leo. We are equal." She unscrewed the lid of the container, the faint hiss of the seal breaking echoing in the horrifying silence of the room. The stench intensified, making my sinuses burn. But that got me thinking, if I'm not the pretty one, if my looks are just packaging, what exactly do I bring to this marriage? Nothing. That's what. So I'm gonna knock you down a few pegs, to even things out. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching dread. I could see the liquid now, shimmering slightly in the dim light, catching the faint reflection of the window. Along the side of the container, there was a stark yellow and black illustration, a beaker spilling its contents onto a bare hand, the flesh melting away, bones exposed. My breath hitched. This wasn't some petty revenge. This was pure, unadulterated madness. "Hannah," I stammered, my voice raw with terror. "Please, no, don't do this." My mind raced, searching for an escape, a way to reason with the unreasoning. But there was nothing. The cuffs held fast. My body, usually quick and agile, was paralyzed by fear. This felt like being back in that locked room. The helplessness, the rising heat, the knowledge that something awful was about to happen and I couldn't stop it. The last thing I saw, the very last clear image before the world dissolved into agony, was her face, her big, bright smile, the one that so many men had found captivating, was now stretched wide, a rictus of pure, delighted malice behind the transparent mask. And then the container tipped. A scalding, searing liquid doused my eyes, my face. The pain was immediate, absolute, and overwhelming. It was as if an invisible battalion of hungry ants, armed with acid and fire, had sunk their mandibles into my skin, burrowing, dissolving, consuming. I roared, a primal sound torn from the deepest part of my gut, but it was muffled, gurgling, as the fluid began to melt away the very tissues of my mouth. I clawed at my face, but my hands were still bound. The metal cuffs, so cold moments before, felt like fiery brands. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of swirling, formless colors, then dissolved into pure, shrieking black. The next few moments, or minutes, or hours, time became meaningless, were a blur of sensation without sight. Vague echoes of struggle, of a guttural scream tearing from my bubbling lips. I was on the floor, somehow. Had I broken free from the cuffs? Had Hannah, in her twisted amusement, released me? The raw agony on my face was a constant, blinding fire. My nightshirt, soaked in the caustic fluid, was growing hotter by the second, clinging to my chest, burning through the fabric. I ripped it off, tearing it over my head with a desperate, guttural grunt. As the fabric peeled away, there came a sudden, sharp flash of bright light, followed by a tinkling, delighted laugh. Hannah, she was watching this. She was enjoying. This, my disfigurement, was her entertainment. What I didn't realize at the time, what my ruined eyes couldn't see, was that she wasn't just watching, she was taking pictures, snapping photos to WhatsApp to her friends, to our mutual acquaintances. In the morning, they'd wake up, open their phones, and find images of me, clawing at my melting face, wrestling my burning shirt over my head, accompanied by some breezy, innocent caption like, "My ugly man's got that beach bod," or "My hubby's new Halloween mask." They would chuckle, believing it was some kind of sick joke, a staged prank. Disoriented, still burning, I screamed for help, a raspy, liquefying sound that tasted of blood and chemicals. Again and again, no response. The vast apartment swallowed my cries, absorbed them into its silent, pristine walls. The air, thick with the stench of scorched flesh and the sharp tang of the acid, felt like it was choking me. My phone, my old flip phone, bless its analog heart, was usually charging on the bedside cabinet. I fumbled, my hands sweeping the floor near the bed. Nothing. I was blind, utterly, completely blind. The world was a chaotic, formless abyss, filled with the phantom echoes of past horrors. The smell of burning flesh reminding me of things I tried desperately to forget, things that should have stayed buried. That acrid smell, the raw, tearing pain, it dragged me back to a memory I couldn't quite grasp, of fire and screams and utter helplessness. I fell to my hands and knees, crawling, scrabbling, my raw fingers brushing against cold, smooth wood. The bedroom door, I found the frame, pulled myself through. The carpeted hall, my fingers slid over the thick pile, guiding me. Then, suddenly, the floor changed. Cold, tiled. The bathroom, my last desperate hope, guided by muscle memory, by instinct. I worked my way towards the faint, metallic scent of plumbing, my hands spider-walking up the side of what I assumed was the bathtub. My fingers curled over the edge, slick with a mixture of sweat, acid, and something else. Something viscous. With a desperate heave, using the towel rack as a fulcrum, I dragged my ruined body to a standing position, my legs trembling violently. The controls for the shower, chest height. I remembered. Still blind, the inferno raging on my face, growing worse with each passing second. I mashed buttons, my fingers blindly seeking the right lever, the right dial. Pressure. Where was the pressure? Then, with a sudden, blessed rush, a blast of perfect, icy water hit me in the face. It was shocking, a physical blow, but it was also a momentary, exquisite relief from the all-consuming fire. I leaned into it, letting the cold water stream over my face, over my chest, hoping to wash away the burning, to stop the corrosive work of the acid. It wasn't long before the shower head got yanked from its holster. I heard a soft thwack as it hit something, and then the powerful jet of cold water. My only solace was redirected. It pelted my stomach, then moved across my torso, stinging, chilling, before moving around the side of my thighs, hitting my legs. I heard a soft, delighted giggle. Hannah, she was still here, still watching, still playing. As it turned out, she had decided to record an Insta story. Water fight with the hideous hubby. I heard her coo, her voice muffled slightly, probably by the mask. Love how we're still so goofy after all these years. The click of a camera phone, followed by another flash of light, burned through the closed lids of my eyes. A new wave of desperate terror washed over me. She was documenting this. My humiliation, my destruction. This was her twisted masterpiece. I toppled over the side of the tub, my ribs thudding against the cold, tiled floor with a sickening crunch. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through my already ravaged body. I scrambled, blindly clawing, desperate to escape her sight, her presence, her horrifying amusement. My hands found the bathroom door frame again, pulling myself through. The outer hall, more carpet. I was trying to reach the front door, to get out, to escape this house that had become my personal, private hell. My hand groped for the floor, found only a handful of air, And then I went toppling down the stairs, a ragged scream tearing from my throat. Each step was a jarring, bone-jarring impact, a fresh jolt of pain to my bruised and burning body. I landed in a heap at the bottom, disoriented, bruised, gasping for breath, the taste of blood in my mouth. I was trapped, utterly lost in that maze of a house, blind and burning, a rat in a predator's trap. This wasn't working. My only chance of summoning help was with Hannah's phone. But how to get it from her? She was playing with me, a cat with a mouse, her cruelty escalating with every second. A sudden, stiff shove, then another. My darling wife. She wrestled my flailing, burning body onto an armchair in the lounge, the heavy fabric rough against my ruined skin. Her delicate voice, barely audible through the haze of agony and the roaring in my ears, cooed something I couldn't quite decipher. Almost done, my love. Then, I felt her ease herself into a seat across my lap. Her weight was light, almost imperceptible, but her one arm draped across the back of my neck felt like a lead weight, pinning me, exposing my face to her scrutiny. My ruined eyes, useless as they were, could still feel the warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume, now mixed with the overpowering stench of my own burning flesh. My mind, reeling from the pain and terror, finally grasped her intention. Oh, God. She was taking a selfie. She was actually taking a selfie. She truly had lost it. The madness was absolute. The second I saw a flashing light, even through my destroyed vision, a spark of pure, desperate adrenaline surged through me. My last chance. Later. I was told by the medics that in the action, shot captured by her phone, my face had the consistency of strawberry jelly, and where our cheeks touched, melted skin stretched out like the warm, stringy cheese on a piece of garlic bread. A sick, visceral image I would never truly see, but would forever feel. Still blind, still burning. I lashed out with every ounce of strength I had left. I swiped wildly, not aiming, just flailing, trying to connect with anything, with her. My hand connected with something small, hard. Her phone. It went spinning out of her hand, skittering across the polished floor. I heard a muffled cry from her, a grunt of surprise. Her weight lifted from my lap. She was trying to run. No, not this time. This was it. If she slipped away, if she called the police first, I'd be left here to rot, a disfigured, mad testament to her depravity. My reluctant conscience, my fatal flaw, twisted into something savage and primal. I cut off her escape, blindly reaching, stumbling, my burning face a beacon of agony. My hands connected with her, gripping, pulling, with every ounce of strength in my body, fueled by pain and a desperate, primal need to survive. I rained down blows. I heard sickening wet thuds, the crunch of bone, the shattering of teeth. Her screams were high-pitched, piercing, like an animal caught in a trap. My better half fought back, lashing out, her nails tearing away chunks of flesh from my already ruined face and arms. Medics would later tell me huge portions of bone shone through where she'd clawed me. Then, with a final, wet gasp, Hannah collapsed onto the floor. I heard a low, broken groan. I fell with her, collapsing beside her, my hands raw and trembling, reaching out. My fingers, slick and burning, ran across her crumpled features. No more breathtaking than the first day of summer smile. Most of the polish had been wiped off those well-defined cheekbones. A grim, terrifying satisfaction, brief and bitter, washed over me. From there, my survival became a terrifying game of Marco Polo. The phone, her phone, was somewhere. It had taken shelter beneath the sofa, or perhaps the coffee table. I heard it hum, a faint vibration on the polished wood. My fingers, still shaking, fumbled, searching, sweeping the ground. Finally, and they closed around something cold, slick, and familiar. The phone, its screen, a hazy, blurry glow, even through my damaged sight, showed a green circle, a button. In the center, call. I tapped it, my finger smearing something across the glass. The phone held to my ear. I heard the faint, distant ringing, then a concerned voice. 911, what is your emergency? I screamed. I screamed until my lungs gave out, until my throat was raw and burning. I screamed until the police officers kicked open the front door, their flashlights cutting through the dim apartment like alien probes. I screamed until the paramedics swarmed me, their voices calm and professional, their hands gentle as they lifted me onto a stretcher. The wail of the ambulance sirens was loud in my ears, a cacophony that drowned out the echoes of my own despair. A kind voice, a paramedic, promised me everything would be okay, that they'd save my vision. A lie, a kind, necessary lie. 12 weeks I spent in recovery, my face a landscape of bandages and raw skin, a mummified parody of a human. My world was still a blur, the edges of my vision clouded by scar tissue and trauma. The authorities took Hannah, a quick pit stop in the emergency room for her, then straight to jail. She was awaiting trial, a monster in human skin, now stripped of her precious beauty. From what I overheard, the other inmates had already taken to calling her the Elephant Woman. A cruel irony, considering her obsession. I was free, yes, but the world outside the bandages was still a blur, and the scars, both visible and invisible, ran deeper than I could ever have imagined. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a man who'd seen too much, that this was just another chapter, another layer. The chronicle of my trauma was far from over. The blue and white cruiser sat like a discarded toy, its engine a silent lie, the faint shimmer of condensation on its windows betraying the frigid pre-dawn air. My breath hitched, a rusty nail in my throat, each inhale a jagged tear at my windpipe. On the hood, folded neatly, lay 2 police uniforms, empty and limp as a broken promise, the cold night teasing their fabric. They were gone, all of them, and the message, scrawled in what felt like my own blood on the steamy bathroom mirror, screamed its truth, echoing the universe's cruel joke. We are everywhere. We are everyone. No safe haven. The world, it seemed, wasn't just indifferent. It was a goddamn farm, and I was just another pig for the slaughter, just like that place beyond the veil. No escape, never any escape. It had started as it always did, with a quiet wrongness, a subtle shift in the familiar fabric of reality that only I, it seemed, was cursed to perceive. Just an hour earlier, I'd woken on my mother's couch, the worn leather of my jacket digging into my side, an unwelcome guest in a nightmare that was only just beginning to unfold its gruesome petals. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, was off on some cruise, probably sipping overpriced cocktails and complaining about the shuffleboard. I'd been house-sitting for her all week, a temporary anchor in a life lived perpetually adrift. The job was easy enough. Feed the cat, water the plants, pretend I was a normal person for a few days. Up until tonight, it had been the most peaceful stretch I'd had in months, a bland, unthreatening monotony I usually craved. Around 10 p.m. or so, my internal clock tried to tell me, a sound ripped through the quiet suburban night, jarring me from a fitful doze. It was static, not the gentle hiss of a faraway radio, but the raw, unadulterated shriek of white noise, escalating from a whisper to a deafening roar in a matter of seconds. My eyes snapped open, my heart already hammering against my ribs, a familiar terror coiling in my gut. I practically vaulted off the couch, my muscles tensing for a fight, a desperate flight, anything but this sonic assault. My gaze darted to the flat-screen TV across the room, its black mirror now a kaleidoscope of frantic, aggressive snow. I lunged, my fingers fumbling for the power button, desperate to silence the caterwauling banshee trapped within the speakers. The instant the screen flickered to black, and the horrific noise evaporated, leaving behind a ringing void. My mind finally tried to catch up, like a broken old engine sputtering to life. Confusion, thick and unwelcome, immediately settled over me. I looked at the very couch I just abandoned. I didn't remember falling asleep there. In fact, I could have sworn, with the kind of certainty that usually precedes a profound wrongness, that I had been in her spare bedroom, tucked into the too soft mattress, attempting to coax some actual sleep from my exhausted brain. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, my thumb tracing the cool metal of my old analog watch. A grounding tick I developed somewhere between the snow-choked mountain pass and the endless highways. I wasn't checking the time. I was checking for some sliver of normalcy, some proof that the world hadn't quite abandoned its orbit, to shake off the lingering disorientation, or perhaps to simply avoid the creeping dread. I forced myself to examine the living room. It was a comfortable, if dated, space with two beige couches, one nestled against the far wall, facing the TV, and the other, my current perch, tucked under the wide bay window. My gaze swept over the familiar clutter, stacks of magazines, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a forgotten coffee cup. Then I saw it, on the window couch, where I had supposedly been sleeping, a crisp, white piece of paper, folded neatly in half. My brow furrowed. Nobody was supposed to be here, not even close. I walked over, my movements stiff, and picked it up. My fingers, calloused from years of gripping steering wheels and warehouse pallets, unfolded it to reveal cramped, almost childish handwriting. Chicken scratch indeed. Spot the differences? My lips curled into a mirthless smile. A prank. It had to be. I'd completely forgotten I'd given a spare key to Sarah a few weeks back. She was always trying to inject some much-needed fun into my perpetually grim existence. "All right, Sarah," I muttered, my voice a rough rasp in the sudden silence. "I'll play." I put the note down on the glass coffee table, trying to project an air of playful exasperation I didn't feel, and scoped out the entire room. The first thing that snagged my attention was my old, clunky desktop computer. It should have been on the small end table beside the wall-facing couch, a dusty monument to procrastination. Instead, it was on the floor, tucked against the baseboard, almost as if someone had just casually kicked it there. Odd, but not terrifying. Sarah was clumsy. The next thing I noticed made the air in the room feel suddenly heavy, thick with unspoken wrongness. My late grandmother's porcelain doll, that goddamn thing, it usually sat on a high, dusty shelf on the wall, a creepy sentinel collecting dust. Now, it was perched directly where my computer had been, its small, painted smile stretched unnaturally wide. I stared into its black, bead-like eyes, cold and vacant, which clashed sickeningly with its garish jester outfit. A prickle of unease, sharp and sudden, snaked down my spine. This wasn't just a creepy doll. This was a deliberate act, a violation. My gut, a loyal but weary oracle, screamed that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. It was the same icy dread that had settled in my bones in that quaint diner with Ethan. The feeling that beauty and normalcy were just a thin veneer over something unspeakable. Or when Olivia had smiled at me with those two bright eyes. This was the whisper of something deeply, domestically wrong. A familiar prelude to the chaos that always seemed to find me. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but my heart, thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs, already knew better. There was no rational explanation for the things that clung to my wake. No simple answers for the horrors that insisted on being part of my narrative. I tried to shake it off, to attribute it to Sarah's twisted sense of humor, but the skin on my arms crawled. My hand brushed against the pocket of my cargo shorts, an automatic gesture. When I sleep, I always keep my phone in my pocket, a lifeline, a window to the outside world, however tenuous. It wasn't there. I patted down my pockets again, then scoured the couch cushions, peered under the coffee table. Nothing. The phone was gone. "Okay, joke's over, babe," I yelled out, my voice sounding strained, a little too loud in the sudden, unnerving silence. My cynicism battled with a growing knot of genuine alarm. This wasn't Sarah. This was something else. I expected a playful giggle, a gotcha from a hidden corner. I expected anything but the response I got. After a few seconds of strained silence, a new sound erupted, not from the living room, but from my mother's bedroom, down the short hall, her ancient, crackling radio, which she only ever listened to for the morning news, suddenly blared to life. Big band music, loud and distorted, a cacophony of brass and drums that sounded less gleeful and more malevolent. The static, I realized with a jolt, had been a prelude. My immediate reaction, one I've never quite understood, was pure, unadulterated fury. Anytime I'm faced with an unexpected, jarringly loud noise, something in me snaps. It's a deep, primal anger that overrides fear. A trauma response I've never been able to trace back to its source, though a part of me always wonders if it's tied to that fire, that chaos from a lifetime ago. I sprinted down the hall, my worn leather jacket slapping against my back, my boots thudding on the thin carpet. I burst into my mother's room, a small, feminine sanctuary now polluted by the sonic assault. My hand reached for the volume knob on the old radio, my jaw tight with a primal need to silence it. I started yelling, for no real reason other than the pure, unadulterated rage that pulsed through my veins. What the hell is going on? "Cut it out!" Just as my fingers brushed the knob, a female singer's voice cut through the brassy din, clear and chilling despite the blare. Her words, sung with a lilting, almost playful cadence, twisted my stomach into knots. Buried alive, my screams I recall. Years went by. People came and they I slammed the volume knob, twisting it counterclockwise with a savage force that nearly ripped it off. The music, the voice, the dread, all died instantly. But my body moved on instinct. My mind screamed at me, a panicked internal voice clawing at my sanity. Turn it back on. Hear what the hell she was saying. The urge was overwhelming, a sickening fascination with the horror, a cursed curiosity. With a shaking hand, I twisted the knob just enough for the softest whisper of sound. It wasn't the woman's crooning or the big band. It was a popular, catchy pop song, generic and saccharine, playing at a barely audible hum, the kind of song you heard everywhere and never noticed. The transition was so abrupt, so seamless. It was almost more terrifying than the eerie lyrics. It spoke of a deliberate control, a playful cruelty. At this point, the whole spot the differences game had entirely slipped my mind, buried under layers of adrenaline and mounting dread. But when I turned around, it came back in a big, gut-wrenching way. My mother had 3 large, framed family portraits hanging above her bed, a triptych of smiling faces, all from happier, simpler times. But now, to my horror, my own face was conspicuously absent from each one. My head had been meticulously cut out of every photograph, leaving behind gaping oval voids where my smiling face should have been. The sheer, audacious threat of it, the chilling implication, didn't scare me the most. What truly sent a jolt of icy terror through my veins was the impossible precision, the surgical patience, the time someone had taken. They had carefully removed each picture from its frame, severed my head with what looked like an X-Acto knife, then painstakingly replaced the now mutilated photo back into the frame, re-securing it and re-hanging it, perfectly straight. I had gotten into my bed, in the spare room, at 9:45 p.m. The door to my mother's room had been open all day, and I never once noticed anything odd. Not a sound, not a flicker of movement, not the scent of a stranger. It was the same sick feeling I'd gotten when I realized Mitch hadn't been Mitch at all, that the imposter had been living in the walls, breathing my air, watching me sleep. They had been inside, right under my nose, and I hadn't known. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My hand, the one not trembling, went to my watch again, its familiar weight a paltry comfort. I climbed onto her bed, the soft mattress feeling like a trap, to inspect the pictures better, a morbid curiosity overriding every instinct to flee. I needed to see how they'd done it, needed to understand the impossible. Boom! I nearly screamed, a choked, pathetic sound. I shit you not. What sounded like a gunshot, or perhaps a small, controlled explosion, echoed from across the hall, directly from my own room. The sheer, unexpected violence of the noise, the concussive force of it, scared me so badly that I lost my footing on the bed, tumbling forward, my hand outstretched in a desperate attempt to brace myself, slammed into the bed frame, then slid across the glass of one of the picture frames, now shattered from my fall. A sharp, searing pain shot up my arm as the broken glass bit deep into my palm. At this point, any sensible person would just leave, right? Any sane, self-preserving human being would have turned tail and bolted, screaming into the night. I knew I should have. My go bag, always packed and ready, was probably still by the door. My mind screamed at me to run, to sprint out of this nightmare house, this domestic tomb, but it felt like my body was being pulled, inexorably, towards my room, like an invisible string had been tethered to my chest, tugging me deeper into the abyss. It wasn't courage, it was a horrifying compulsion, a twisted form of my reluctant conscience, pulling me towards the source of the dread, perhaps because a part of me, the part that hated itself, felt I deserved to see the next horror. With my back pressed against the cold wall of the hallway, a sliver of broken glass still embedded in my palm, I slowly, excruciatingly slowly, opened the door to my room. A shriek, raw and involuntary, tore from my throat when I saw what was inside. It wasn't just a few things moved around, not a simple spot the differences game. It was a complete, utter upheaval. Everything was changed. Every damn thing in that room had been moved to a different area, rearranged into a chaotic, incomprehensible tableau. My bed, usually neatly made, was now against a different wall. My dresser was overturned, clothes spilling out like guts. It was a deliberate act of violation, a grotesque mockery of order. But amidst the chaos, there was only one thing out of place in a new, terrifying way. A folded piece of paper sat on my pillow, pristine white against the rumpled fabric. I walked numbly towards it, the broken glass in my hand a dull throb compared to the hammering of my heart. I unfolded the note. Let's get obvious. The handwriting was even worse than the previous note, almost frantic, as if scrawled in haste or intense excitement. As I put down the note, my gaze, drawn by an unseen force, drifted straight ahead. My bedroom is right next to our raised back porch, with sliding glass doors serving as the barrier between my sanctuary and the outside world. A knot the size of a bowling ball, cold and heavy, grew in my stomach as I looked at the small table on the porch, visible through the glass. Bob had been set up right in the middle of it. Bob. As a side job, my mother teaches CPR classes for the community, and Bob is one of the 7 life-size dummies we have for those sessions. He was supposed to be in the garage, stacked with his plastic brethren. Now, he was being propped up, eerily upright, by what looked like an old, rusty pipe jammed into his back. His rubber mouth, usually agape for artificial respiration, was now covered by a black leather ball gag, cinched tight, and worse, much worse, 2 gleaming, wickedly sharp hunting knives had been plunged into his plastic eyes, reflecting the dim porch light like malevolent stars. It was a mutilation, grotesque and deliberate, a horrifying tableau. But what scared me the most about Bob's performance was the message, scrawled crudely in red paint, or something that looked like it, on his torso. Locks couldn't keep us out. My blood ran cold. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not only had they been inside, not only had they meticulously rearranged and violated my space, but they had also done it with absolute impunity. The thought dragged me back to that empty, burned-out shell of a house in Sycamore Grove, the one I can barely remember, the one that should have protected my family. Locks, walls, doors. They meant nothing. They never had. Then, just as the full weight of that realization settled, I heard them, footsteps, under me, coming from the basement. My mouth slowly dropped open. A choked gasp caught in my throat. I froze, my every nerve ending screaming, trying to count the heavy, deliberate thuds. 1, 2, 3. From what I gathered in those 5 eternal seconds, 3 distinct sets of heavy, dragging footsteps were moving around down there, directly beneath me. Just like that, my body, usually so weary, kicked into a primal overdrive I hadn't felt since running from that hungry thing in the woods beyond the old farmhouse. No more reluctant conscience, no more morbid curiosity, pure, unadulterated survival. My go bag was probably still where I left it, but there was no time. I spun on my heel, sprinting out of my room, down the short hall, and towards the front door. Every fiber of my being screamed for open air, for escape. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I was scared out of my mind because the door to the basement, a heavy, bolted wooden slab, was practically beside the front door. They were between me and the only clear exit. My hand was already on the cold metal of the doorknob, twisting it, desperation clawing at my throat. I hadn't even looked out the peephole, hadn't registered anything beyond the blinding need to get out. But then I heard it, a low, gravelly voice, deceptively calm, from directly outside the door, just inches from my ear. No, there's no leaving. I nearly got whiplash with how quickly my neck snapped upwards. My gaze shot to the front door's small, rectangular window, the kind you'd find on a suburban house. Standing there, silhouetted against the weak glow of the street lamp, was a very built person. They wore a plain blue mechanic's outfit, pristine and unblemished, and a stark, featureless white mask. The kind of blank, empty mask that chills you more than any ghoulish grin. It was too perfect, too clean, like the skin on Olivia's carpet, so neatly arranged, so horrifyingly human. It seemed like the 5 seconds we locked eyes through that pane of glass stretched into 5 hours, a lifetime of frozen terror. The blankness of the mask was a void, absorbing all light, all hope. But this person, this entity, broke that illusion of stasis when he suddenly, casually, slammed his fist into the door's window. Not only did this send a jolt of pure terror through my chest, giving me a mini heart attack, but it also produced a spiderweb of cracks across the glass. The thought of that blank-faced man, so easily breaching my last barrier, coming into my house, into my mother's house, into this space that was supposed to be safe, snapped me fully into survival mode. There was no fear to freeze me up, only a chilling, desperate clarity, an almost mechanical assessment of threat and escape to help me live through this. As I'm writing this, huddled in the borrowed warmth of a neighbor's guest room, I still don't know why I did what I did next. My lips, cold and numb, curled upwards. I smiled right at the man, a wide, unsettling grin, a desperate, defiant act of absurdity in the face of absolute terror. I knew that at least 4 men were either in my house or trying to get in, that the odds were stacked impossibly against me, but I smiled right into his damn blank face. It was the only shred of control I had left, a final middle finger to the cruel, indifferent universe that seemed determined to break me. Then, without breaking eye contact for another agonizing second, I turned around and started sprinting towards the back door. I could hear the man on my front porch yell, "Fuck!" as if he hadn't expected me to react. Hadn't anticipated my suicidal defiance? Good. Let him be surprised. The back door, it felt miles away. My lungs burned, air rasping in and out, the smell of dust and old fear filling my nostrils. Once I reached the back door, yanking at the old deadbolt, I heard the heavy basement door creak open behind me, followed by a torrent of heavy, stomping footsteps. Closer now, gaining on me. But before they could even all get out of that damn door, I was already halfway down my backyard porch steps, clumsy and desperate. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and invigorating. Once I reached the bottom, I risked a glance behind me. The large, rusted gate that led into my backyard, usually bolted shut, was wide open, swaying slightly on its hinges. And standing in the gaping maw of the opening, silhouetted by the distant streetlights, was the man from earlier. The one in the mechanic's outfit and the white mask. This time he was brandishing a baseball bat, its dark gleam a promise of bone-shattering pain. I didn't even look again to see if he was chasing me. Didn't wait to see if the others had spilled out of the house. I just ran. I sprinted towards my back fence, a rickety wooden barrier that separated my property from a patch of dense, neglected woods. My muscles screamed, but I launched myself, scrambling over the top, the rough wood scraping my already cut palm. I landed hard on the other side, a painful thud, and immediately started screaming for help, my voice raw and hoarse, tearing through the suffocating silence of the night. I barely registered the small patch of woods behind my house, the gnarled trees reaching like skeletal fingers. But luckily, by some miracle, a few teenagers were there, huddled around a dying bonfire, chugging hard iced tea and probably getting up to no good. My frantic screams, my disheveled appearance, and the terror plastered across my face must have been convincing enough. It didn't take much of my incoherent, panicked story to convince them to let me use their phone. The only girl there, a blonde with wide, shocked eyes, shoved hers into my trembling hand. I fumbled with it, dialing 911, my fingers slick with sweat and blood. I explained everything, the whole unbelievable, sanity-shattering nightmare, to the operator. She was calm, professional, telling me that squad cars were on their way, but that none of us were safe out in the open. "Find shelter, sir, immediately." So, and with a nod to the teenagers, we all ran, a desperate, terrified huddle, towards my neighbor's house. If you're reading this, Daryl, thank you for letting us in. You probably think I'm insane, but you let us in. The cops arrived 4 minutes later, sirens wailing, lights flashing, a brief, fragile beacon of hope in the darkness. They swept the house before doing anything else, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the gloom. They didn't find anybody there. No blank-faced mechanic, no silent accomplices, no sign of the 3 sets of footsteps from the basement, but they did find a bunch of horrifying tools set up down there. The sheriff, a big man with weary eyes, described them in vague, chilling terms. Restraints, sharpening stones, some kind of staging area. They assumed that I must not have been paying attention to the basement much, that I was just a negligent house sitter who missed a meticulous home invasion. I tried to reassure them, tried to argue, my voice cracking with desperation. "That's impossible," I insisted. "I went down there today, around 8:30 p.m., to play Xbox. It was empty. There was nothing." The sheriff shook his head, a gesture of tired disbelief. "That's impossible, son. The whole setup they had down there would have taken at least 3 hours to put together. Minimum." The time frame of the crime didn't add up for any of us, a gaping void in the narrative that defied logic. They also questioned how I didn't wake up when I was supposedly moved from my bed to the couch, or when they rearranged my entire house. Talking to them honestly felt like a really bad nightmare sequence from a David Lynch movie, a surreal, Kafkaesque interrogation. It didn't feel real. None of it did. The police, who weren't for all their authority, couldn't grasp the true nature of the violation. They saw a break-in, I saw the unraveling of reality. I'd dealt with authorities before. After that phantom hitchhiker incident, after the things I'd seen on the road, they always looked at me like I was a liar or a lunatic. Always. Most of the cops left around 11:45 p.m., leaving behind a single squad car parked outside in my driveway, a silent blue and white Guardian in case I needed them. I convinced my mom to stay on her cruise, assuring her everything was fine, that it was just some vandals. I felt a fragile sense of safety with the cop car sitting there, its presence a thin shield. Besides everything being moved, things felt relatively normal now, a strange, eerie calm after the storm. Until I entered the bathroom. It was a room where I hadn't spotted the difference. I hadn't dared. It was my last bastion of normalcy, or so I hoped. The fluorescent light hummed, casting a sterile glow. Then my eyes found the floor. Soap was all over it, like some deranged cleaner had gone wild. My shower curtain, a simple floral print, was shredded into long, hanging strips, like bloody ribbons. My breath caught. I saw a glint of white behind the toilet. My phone, the missing phone, it was there, wrapped neatly, meticulously, in toilet paper. And then I saw it, painted on the steamed-up mirror, in that same atrocious, desperate hand, was the final message. The punchline to the universe's cruelest joke: we are everywhere. We are everyone. No safe haven. I audibly said, "How the fuck?" The words were barely a whisper, a broken plea. My mind raced, trying to process it. Why wasn't this told to me by the police? Why was this room not brought up at all during their sweep? Had they missed it? Or had it happened after they left? A fresh wave of paranoia, colder and sharper than anything I'd felt tonight, washed over me. The cop car, the sense of safety. It was a lie. It was always a lie. My heart began to race again, a frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest. I ran, stumbling, into my living room, my gaze fixed on the front window. The squad car still sat in my driveway, a silent, mocking testament to my foolish belief in external protection. But it was empty. Nobody was in it. Instead, those two police uniforms, freshly folded, sat on the hood, catching the first pale light of dawn. They were an offering, a warning. I tried calling 911 again, my fingers fumbling with the toilet paper-wrapped phone, but it wasn't working. Dead. No signal. My neighbors, Daryl and his wife, weren't home, even though they had been 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes. Enough time for anything to happen. I'm not trying to write a cliche, the author dies at the end story, because right now, as the sun begins to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in sickeningly cheerful hues, I'm very much alive. My hand throbs, my muscles ache, and my mind feels like shattered glass. But I'm worried that I won't be for much longer. If I somehow survive this, I want to share my story. I want to ask all of you, out there in the vast, indifferent darkness, if you have ever been in a situation like this one where everything almost feels normal, where the pieces seem to fit, but in fact, everything, every subtle change, every deliberate violation, every single second of it seems to be contributing to your death. This isn't just a house invasion. This is a message, and I am its unwilling recipient. Character count 987. The shower ran, a steady white noise that usually lulled me. But tonight it only amplified the static in my head. Derek was humming some pop song, off-key, the kind of casual disregard for reality that turned my stomach to ice. I watched him through the steam, the water sluicing down his back, and felt the slow, deliberate crawl of true horror. The old man on the TV screen had just finished his grim report, and every word, every image, had been a fresh stab, twisting the knife. But it was the casual, off-key hum, the oblivious slosh of water, that truly turned the mundane into the monstrous. He was smiling. He was always smiling. That smile, that monstrous, innocent-looking smile, was the culmination of weeks spent slogging through the suffocating heat of a city under siege, of grocery deliveries to lonely souls, and of a creeping, insidious wrongness that had first announced itself with the near scream of tires and the disarming cackle of an old woman who knew too much. My primary mandate these days was anonymity, a quiet existence spent outrunning a past that clung to me like wet ashes. Transient jobs were my specialty, night shifts in warehouses, long-haul trucking, the kind of work that kept me moving, kept me invisible. But a global lockdown had clipped my wings, trapped me in a rented room, forcing me into a new kind of transient work. Delivering groceries, it was an exercise in pure tedium, a slow bleed of my soul, but it paid the bills, and it kept me out of the kind of trouble that seemed to find me when I stopped moving for too long. My worn leather jacket felt like a second skin, heavy and comforting, even in the sweltering spring heat that was already announcing summer's brutal intentions. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a timepiece, felt cool against my thumb as I traced its worn face, a small anchor in a world spun off its axis. The council job offered two choices: suffocate in a warehouse, counting canned goods under fluorescent lights, or become a glorified mule, ferrying pre-packed boxes to people's doorsteps. I chose the latter, mainly because my tolerance for human interaction hovered somewhere between minimal and non-existent. It also meant I got to be alone in my beat-up sedan, the engine purring its tired protest against the asphalt. My only companion, the endless loop of my own cynical thoughts. Most of my clientele were the usual suspects: the elderly, the immune-compromised, the truly vulnerable. The lockdown had turned their homes into fortresses, their lives into quiet cages. Each delivery came with a sheet, a sterile summary of a person's existence: name, contact, address, and the boilerplate reason for delivery. Useful, I suppose, if you cared about such things. I tried not to care. Caring was how you got tangled, how you ended up with blood on your hands that wasn't your own. But there was a sliver of something, deep down, a reluctant conscience that I regretted every damn day. It was the part of me that understood confinement, the feeling of being trapped behind invisible walls, the frantic fluttering of a moth against glass. It was the part that had somehow survived my own personal inferno. And it was that part that silently whispered, "Do what you can, Vance, just this once." A whisper I usually ignored, but sometimes a situation just hooked into it, dragged it out into the harsh light. This particular day, the sun was a brassy gong, hammering down on the city. The air hung thick and heavy, tasting of exhaust fumes and the promise of a headache. I just dodged a truly suicidal tabby cat that decided to practice its kamikaze dive into my front tire. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the worn leather of the wheel slick with sweat. I was supposed to be delivering to 24B, Peace Gardens. Mrs. Margaret Willis, 82, the sheet informed me. As I wrestled the monstrously heavy box of groceries out of the trunk, two oranges, fat and smug, decided to make a break for it. They rolled, gaining momentum, past the manicured lawn, across the pavement, and finally, with a pathetic thwack, splattered against the dusty brick outer wall of the Peace Gardens. I grimaced, a fresh wave of irritation washing over me. I looked up, half expecting an angry shout, but instead, a small, wrinkled face was peering from the upstairs window of 24B, a hand pressed to her mouth, tears of laughter streaming down her cheeks. "Mrs. Willis?" My initial annoyance melted, replaced by a grudging, almost alien sense of relief. At least someone found my ineptitude amusing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd had to sheepishly text her earlier for directions after circling the same block 3 times. My internal GPS clearly on the fritz. It was her, A new text. Don't worry again, sweetheart. I didn't see a thing. I looked back up at the window. She winked, a surprisingly spry, mischievous gesture, and then she was gone. I took the opportunity to haul the box to her front door, which swung open almost immediately. Hello, Ada, is it? Her voice was surprisingly strong, a cheerful trill, still laced with residual chuckles. She looked like a kindly garden gnome, all bundled sweaters despite the heat, her white hair a halo around a face lined with a lifetime of smiles and sorrows. Yes, hi, hello, I managed, feeling utterly awkward and out of my element. Small talk was a foreign language. Before I could even finish my pathetic greeting, she lunged. It was a surprising burst of energy from such a small, elderly woman, and she seized the crusty white loaf of bread from the top of the box. Oh, sweetheart, no, you've put the bread in the wrong way, see? She flipped it over with surprising dexterity. Now the exposed side isn't touching the box, and the plastic side is against the box, you see? She continued to giggle, a gentle, musical sound. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm forever doing things like this. Oh, I can't wait to tell Tony about this when he comes down soon. You know what he'll say? He'll say, that sounds just like you. Mom, are you sure you didn't do it? My son is a right rascal, she chattered on, her words tumbling out like pebbles from an overturned bucket. And as she spoke, something shifted. The cheerful facade, for a fleeting moment, cracked. I saw it then, a shimmering, almost imperceptible film of loneliness in the depths of her eyes, like a stone at the bottom of a well. It hit me, deep in that reluctant conscience I usually manage to suppress. She was probably lonely enough already, but this lockdown, this enforced isolation, it must have twisted the knife. It was the kind of raw, quiet pain I recognized, a familiar ache. Would you, I don't want to take you away from anything, I started, already regretting the words forming on my tongue, my fatal flaw kicking in. But do you want to help me unpack? Her face lit up like a Christmas tree. It would be my pleasure. Ada. She didn't wait for my answer. I'll put the kettle on. I stayed for hours. The small kitchen smelled of old tea, faint potpourri, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, like a distant, metallic tang that was almost certainly my imagination. Mrs. Margaret Willis, 82 years young, had lived. She'd married a bartender named Tony at 19, and the rest, as they say, was history. A history she unspooled for me in vivid, sprawling detail. Friends and enemies, the ups and downs, the stolen kisses, the chance meetings, oceans and deserts and beautiful betrayals. She'd seen it all, lived it all. Tony, her husband, had met an untimely end, but not before leaving her a precious gift. Tony, their son, born a few months later. She spoke of him with such unbridled love, such fierce pride, that it almost made me flinch. I wasn't used to witnessing such open, uncomplicated affection. It felt dangerous. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of deliveries, each one chipping away at my frayed nerves. The heat ratcheted up, transforming the city into a simmering cauldron. My leather jacket felt like a torture device, but I never took it off. It was my armor. The only reprieve was the thought of Mrs. Willis. Over the last few days, my deliveries had somehow started to funnel me back to Peace Gardens, to 24B. I'd begun to feel a strange, almost childlike anticipation as I pulled up to her street, a faint buzz of warmth in my chest. It was a feeling I hadn't known since before everything. It was a feeling I didn't trust. But this time, there was no warm, cheeky grin at the window, no playful wave. This time, I was greeted by a shimmering blue BMW, the kind of car that turned heads not with a roaring engine, but with an almost arrogant silence. It looked immense, like something a secret agent would boast about over cocktails. All sleek lines and dark windows. I half expected it to fire a rocket at me for daring to park behind it. It was too pristine, too perfect for this quiet, unassuming street. It was wrong. My hand went to my watch, tracing the cool metal. "That's Tony's," Mrs. Willis chimed from around the side of her hedge, her voice deflated, grim, but still aiming for that cheerful lilt. The sadness I'd glimpsed before was back, heavier now, a palpable weight in the oppressive air. I tried to bury it, to dismiss it, to tell myself I was imagining things. My eyes dropped to the delivery sheet, then to the box, then back to the sheet, the stark black text swimming before my eyes. Something was definitely off. I approached her slowly, angling the box towards her, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Margaret, I'm really sorry. I think they've given you the wrong box. Let me just go back and..." She cut me off, her gaze fixed on the ground to my left, avoiding my eyes. "Oh no, sweetheart." Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "That's mine." The contrast was undeniable. During our conversation over red berry tea, she talked about how she wouldn't go near Coke. Rots you from the inside. Ada, she'd said. She hadn't even seemed to understand the concept of energy drinks. Yet the list on this sheet, there wasn't a single ingredient on it that a proud, seasoned cook like Mrs. Willis would use. No flour, no fresh vegetables, no spices, nothing for her to work her magic on. My voice dropped to a near whisper, confusion warring with a prickling sense of dread. "And these are your 10 cans of Red Bull, are they, Margaret? Your bottles of Blun?" "Yes." The single word was clipped, devoid of any inflection. Just then, a heavy stomping came from inside the house, like a sloppy, ill-disciplined march. A male voice, loud and coarse, filled the air. "Nah, mate, tell them to fuck chi off. If they're not gonna buy, they're not gonna buy. Hold on a minute." The voice went quiet for a moment. Then, suddenly, it was closer, sharper, right in the doorway. "Who the fuction are you? Why are you in my house? Are you harassing my mom? She's 82, you know?" The flurry of questions hit me like a physical blow, a jackhammer to the gut. It knocked the wind out of me, stole my voice. My mouth opened, but nothing came out, just an aimless head movement, a gawping expression, like a malfunctioning robot fish. Before I could even register a thought, he was issuing commands. "Give us those then. They're ours, not yours." I automatically placed the box on the ground and took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to create distance. He was there in a flash, a tall, burly man in a slim-fitting suit, caked in sweat despite the heat, drenched in a cloying fragrance that left my nose feeling violated, like it had been drowned in bleach. His eyes, small and beady, darted over me, taking inventory, assessing, and there was something in them, a cold, viscous hatred that felt all too familiar. "Oh, for fuck's sake. Mum," he snarled, bending to snatch the box. "I wanted at least 10 minimum. You're so fucking incompetent." Margaret forced a chuckle, a thin, reedy sound that died in the oppressive air. I felt sick, my stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't a bad day. This was something else. I knew that look in his eyes, that coiled rage. I'd seen it before, too many times. It was the mark of a predator. "Good thing you took this in, babe. Mum's too weak to do it herself, but fucking hell. Do you have an arse on you?" He snorted a couple of wet, wheezing laughs, his face reddening, blood boiling, his gaze raking over my body with a leer that felt like a physical violation. Excuse me." The words ripped from my throat before I could stop them. My mind, which had been sluggish with shock, finally kicked into gear. The adrenaline, a familiar, unwelcome rush, flooded my system, leaving me sharper, readier. I'd been here before, too many times. I never wanted to go here again, but here we were. Push had come to shove. Another man, full of simmering violence, wanting to hurt those around him, wanting to assert control. My fists, clenching instinctively at my sides. A memory of phantom pains in my knuckles from past fights. You stupid fucking... He clenched his fist, brought it to the air, his eyes blazing. And for a split second, I thought he was going to hit me. My muscles tensed, preparing for impact, for defense, for the inevitable ugliness. But he didn't. He stopped, his gaze flicking from me to Mrs. Willis, a calculating shift, a reassessment. He turned, the heavy stomp of his feet echoing down the hall. And then he was gone. The air in the small hallway felt heavy with unspoken violence. Margaret's gaze, which had been fixed on her son's retreating back, slowly turned to me. He's not usually like this, sweetie. It's just, work. And having to come here to help me. And well, gosh, he's changed. Even since yesterday. Her voice was a fragile whisper, a desperate attempt to normalize the abnormality. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to bolt, to leave, to disappear. But the image of that loneliness in her eyes, the sheer vulnerability of her, held me rooted. The drive back to Derek's apartment was a blur. My mind replayed the scene, dissecting every word, every gesture. The cloying scent of that cheap cologne still seemed to cling to my clothes, to my skin. I recounted the story to Derek, my words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to articulate the wrongness, to make him understand. He listened, staring at the ceiling, a thoughtful silence that lasted too long. What if you caught him on a bad day? And I mean really fucking bad day. Derek angled, making sure to scoop me up in his arms, pulling me close on the bed, attempting to drive his point home in the comfiest way he knew how. He was warm, solid, a temporary reprieve from the chaos of my life. He tightened his grip, making it clear he didn't want me to leave the bed, and I knew it. He just wanted things to be simple, manageable. Derek, I know what I saw. I know something just isn't right there. That wasn't an argument. Well, it was. But it was worse. He looked like he was going to hit me. He was out of control. The metallic tang of fear, of memory, still clung to my tongue. Derek sighed, shifting his weight. He didn't actually do it though, did he? His voice was even, rational, dismissing. I rolled over, frustrated, pulling away slightly to lay on my stomach. You weren't there. You have no idea what he's like. Trust me on this. I wanted him to trust me. Wanted someone to see the monsters I saw. It was a dangerous hope, a desperate wish. I'll take your word for it. He paused, then his voice took on a reassuring, almost patronizing tone. You said it yourself, though. Mrs. Willis said it was work stress. And with that car, the guy probably does some fucking high-stakes shit, right? I was about to give in, to just kiss him or something, to relax properly for the first time since that ugly encounter. Maybe I could just bury the whole thing behind my walls, let the cynicism reassert its dominance. Maybe this will be the event that finally gets me into at least trying therapy. This could be a real turning point, a moment to step away from the edge, away from the constant grind of survival. I felt the comforting weight of his arm around me, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Sleep felt like a genuine possibility, a dark, velvet escape. Then my phone buzzed, vibrating against my leg. A text from Margaret's number. My breath hitched. Hello, sweetheart. I know it's late, but I could really use a delivery right now from my friend Ada. I jolted up so fast I almost put my back out, the sudden movement ripping me from the soft embrace of false security. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. Firing what? What? Derek sputtered. Jolted awake by my sudden violent movement, I threw my phone at his chest. It landed with a soft thud. My own room, usually a sanctuary, felt like a cage. I flailed about like a deer on ice, yanking any old item of clothing I could find from anywhere. Yesterday's leggings, an oversized jumper from the wash basket, slip-ons that were probably meant for the beach, my go bag, always packed, always ready, sat mocking me by the door. I grabbed it, my hands shaking. "Holy fuck, Derek breathed. I took it he'd read the text. The next thing he did was fling himself out of bed, much in the same way I did, reaching for his dressing gown. "You direct, I'll drive," he shouted, halfway out the door, his voice thick with sleep and disbelief. I followed immediately, the adrenaline now a searing fire in my veins. This was it. This was the moment my reluctant conscience dragged me back into the muck. When we got there, 24B was swallowed in the black nothingness of the night. Not a single light on, no faces at any windows, all curtains drawn tight, like an empty, accusing stare. The quiet suburban street felt unnaturally still, the air heavy, expectant. The sleek blue BMW was gone. Derek strode up to the front door and slammed his fist against it again and again and again. "Hello? Margaret?" His voice was loud, desperate, echoing into the oppressive silence. Unfortunately, the only lights that went on were down the road, as curious neighbors peered from behind their own curtains. A cat, thin and wary, left the scene, disappearing into the shadows. Too much noise, too much human desperation. A couple came out in face masks, staring us down with cold, disapproving eyes. We tried all night, shouting, knocking, calling, nothing. Just the impenetrable silence of a house that felt suddenly, terribly empty. Days later, 2 more texts came from Margaret's number. My heart twisted with each buzz of my phone, a sick anticipation in my gut. All right, we could do with some more Red Bull and a couple of proper good bin bags. 932, sweetheart, 933. Bin bags, a couple of proper good bin bags. The words clung to me, chilling me to the bone. They smelled of cold, metallic death. I couldn't go back. I knew it. My instincts, honed by years of running from the kinds of things that defy explanation, screamed at me to stay away, to bury this deeper than anything else. So I did. I stayed away. I tried to forget. And that's why I'm telling this story now. Because I was watching the TV, just like I intended for today, just trying to escape the endless cycle of fear and paranoia. And the anchorman's voice, calm and detached, filled the room. An elderly woman's body found buried behind the outer wall of Peace Gardens. Margaret Willis was found dead and wrapped in bin bags. The man responsible is Philip Hammond, who took the identity of Mrs. Willis's son, Tony, days before the murder. Police are also looking for Derek Hammond, nephew of Philip Hammond. Derek obtained personal information about Margaret Willis and aided his uncle heavily, or so we believe. If you have any information on their whereabouts, please call our station or 999. The world tilted, the words spun, coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a sudden, sickening fury. My stomach lurched. The smell of that cloying cologne, the precise shade of blue of the BMW, the flat, dead tone of Margaret's voice when she said, "That's mine." All of it. I was transported back to that night. The dark street, the silent house. Derek throwing himself out of bed, grabbing his gown, his voice thick with sleep and concern. "You direct, I'll drive." He never intended to get there in time. He never intended to help her. He was there to ensure her silence, to ensure the job was done. The memory of his casual dismissal, his comforting arm around me, his attempts to convince me it was just work stress. It all took on a monstrous, twisted new meaning. He had known the whole time. The shower ran, a steady white noise. Derek was humming off-key. He was in there now, washing away the evidence, washing away the casual complicity of a man who had helped dispose of a body, who had looked me in the eye and lied, and he was smiling. I'm going to try to leave before he gets out. My go bag is by the door. The worn leather jacket is on the chair. My old analog watch feels heavy, impossibly cold on my wrist. This time, my conscience won't be pulling me into danger. It'll be shoving me out the door. Character count 9948. The waves, slow and deliberate across the black water, hit me harder than any fist. Not a friendly, casual greeting, but a mocking acknowledgement. A predator's salute. The woman's masked face, a crude topography of layered tape, seemed to tilt with a chilling, almost playful curiosity. Her hand, red-streaked even from this distance, lifted, fingers splayed wide against the bruised twilight, beckoning me into the nightmare she was orchestrating. It was a silent, unholy invitation, tearing through the thin veil of false security I'd foolishly woven around myself. In that frozen moment, the world shrank to the narrow rectangle of my binoculars, revealing only her unwavering, malevolent gaze and the horrifying truth. They had seen me, and now they were coming. The memory still makes my breath catch, a phantom chill crawling up my spine, a familiar companion these days. But the long, brutal road to that moment of stark terror began, as these things always do, with a deceptive whisper of peace. It was a Wednesday, late November, the kind of day when the air nips at your exposed skin like a playful, if slightly sadistic, puppy, promising winter's sharp bite without delivering the full frostbite yet. I'd driven east for hours, the worn leather of my jacket molding to my shoulders like a second skin. The engine of the old pickup, a monotonous drone that was both a comfort and a slow-burning irritant. I was heading to my mom's place in the Finger Lakes. Not a visit, not really. More of a strategic retreat. Her secluded lakeside house was supposedly a tranquil escape, far from the suffocating static of cell towers and the relentless hum of obligations I'd left festering back in the city. No internet, no signal, just deep, unspoiled quiet. It sounded like exactly what a man like me, perpetually running from a past that refused to stay buried, needed. A chance to breathe, a chance to simply exist without the constant, low-level thrum of anxiety that had become my default setting. I'd rationalized the trip as a dog-sitting gig. My mom and her latest husband, a bland man named Gary, were off to a funeral in Florida. Leaving Buster, my scruffy mutt, in an unfamiliar kennel was out of the question. Besides, a favor felt less like a desperate escape and more like a normal person's decision. My normal person impression, admittedly, was getting a little threadbare. Pulling onto the winding gravel driveway, the tires crunched a familiar rhythm beneath the truck. The house emerged from the skeletal trees, a dark silhouette against the dying light, its windows like vacant eyes. It was a place steeped in memories, summers of sticky s'mores, cold lake water, the innocent joy of being a kid. Now, the quiet felt different, heavier, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but expectant, like a held breath. It pressed down on me, a physical weight that made the hairs on my arms prickle. My hand went to my old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick I'd picked up somewhere along the road, tracing the smooth, cool glass with my thumb. Not that I cared what time it was just a grounding mechanism, a small, tangible anchor in a world that consistently pulled the rug out from under my feet. Home sweet home, Buster, I muttered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Buster, curled in a furry ball on the passenger seat, lifted his head, tail thumping a soft, hopeful rhythm against the upholstery. He didn't care about the quiet, or the memories, or the creeping unease that had already started to knot in my gut. He just cared about belly rubs and the promise of a walk. A simple creature. I envied him that. The air inside the house was stale, carrying the faint, comforting scent of old wood and dust. I set my worn duffel bags down by the door. The first, a jumble of clothes. The second, my go bag, always packed, always ready. Cash, a change of clothes, a heavy mag light, protein bars, a water bottle, a basic first aid kit, a physical manifestation of my life philosophy. Always be ready to run. It had saved my hide more times than I cared to count. Too many times. The house creaked around me, settling, or perhaps just breathing. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every mundane sound amplified. I found myself scanning the corners of rooms, a habit born of years spent expecting the unexpected, of knowing that danger didn't always announce itself with a trumpet blast. Sometimes, it just was. The first few days were a study in deceptive calm. I slipped into a routine, a manufactured tranquility that felt both alien and strangely seductive. Mornings were for strong coffee and staring out at the lake, its surface a shifting canvas of steel gray under the somber November sky. Afternoons, I'd take Buster for short, aimless wanders around the property, kicking through crisp, fallen leaves, the scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles filling the air. Buster, with his boundless energy, seemed genuinely thrilled by the simplest things, his tail a constant metronome of joy. His uncomplicated happiness was a stark contrast to the coiled tension I carried within me. He was, I realized, the one truly good thing I'd allowed myself to keep, a constant, warm presence that anchored me to something vaguely human. My reluctant conscience, my Achilles heel, now wore fur and slobbered enthusiastically. Evenings were for the deck, for a beer or two, or three in a joint, the sweet, earthy smoke mingling with the crisp autumn air, and the binoculars, always the binoculars. It had become my ritual, a perverse kind of relaxation. The opposite side of the lake was sparsely populated this time of year. Most of the summer cottages shuttered and dark, like sleeping eyes. But one house, a distant, warm glow in the encroaching gloom, always had lights on. Faint silhouettes moved behind the windows, indistinct blurs of human activity. I watched them, a voyeuristic ghost in the dying light, simply observing. There was a grim comfort in watching other people's lives unfold, however dimly, from a safe distance. A reminder of a world I no longer quite belonged to, a world where screams weren't always followed by silence. By the fourth night, the silence of the lake had taken on a new quality. It was no longer just quiet, it was heavy, pressing down, suffocating. The air seemed colder, carrying a dampness that clung to my skin like a shroud, and the shadows stretched long and jagged. No longer just angles of absence, but sentient things, coiling, reaching. The faint rustling of leaves in the distance felt unnervingly close, as if something unseen was slithering just beyond my perception. Even the occasional crackle of the small fire I'd built in the old stone pit seemed ominous, too loud, too sudden in the stillness. It was as though the entire lake was holding its breath, waiting. For what? I didn't know, but I knew the feeling. This wasn't peaceful solitude anymore. This was the prelude. I'd felt it before, that sickening dip in the pit of my stomach, the subtle shift in the world's fabric, the whisper of wrongness that always preceded the scream. It dragged me back to memories I fought to bury, of other quiet places that had suddenly erupted into chaos. Other times I'd been a reluctant witness to the impossible. The Sycamore Grove incident, years ago, was a blur, a white noise hum of primal terror I couldn't access, but its echo lived in every subsequent horror. I was a magnet for this. It seemed a walking, breathing, cursed object. I sat on the deck, my old leather jacket pulled tight around me, the binoculars pressed against my eye sockets. My breath ghosted against the cold metal, clouding the lenses for a split second before clearing. Through the magnified view, the illuminated cottage across the water seemed closer, clearer. I could almost make out the faces of the 4 residents inside, indistinct figures, but I could tell they were laughing, moving, caught up in some game. Normalcy. My stomach clenched. Normalcy was always the most dangerous illusion. Then I saw them, outside the cottage, half hidden in the deeper shadows of the tree line, stood 2 figures. Their faces were obscured by the distance and the gloom, their bodies stiff, unnaturally rigid, not moving. My heart, already beating a nervous rhythm against my ribs, quickened. What the hell? My mind scrambled for an explanation. Something, anything, to fit this into the mundane. Friends playing a prank? A late-night delivery? But the stillness, the utter, unyielding stillness of their posture was all wrong. It wasn't a casual wait. It was a vigil. Were they watching the people inside? The question twisted in my gut, a coiled spring ready to snap. The longer I stared, the more my unease grew, a cold, insidious dread seeping into my bones. I lowered the binoculars, the world shrinking back to the dark expanse of the lake. The faint glow of the distant cottage, the immediate blackness of the woods behind me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing air into my lungs, trying to push away the creeping tendrils of paranoia. Just my overactive imagination. That's what they always said. That's what the shrinks had said. The cops, the few hapless strangers I'd ever tried to confide in. The universe wasn't trying to scare me. I was just broken. But then, an undeniable truth asserted itself. My hand, as if with a will of its own, lifted the binoculars again. And there, standing alongside the first 2 figures, was a third. 3 dark, unmoving silhouettes, all staring intently into the windows of the cottage. They were too still, too dark, too focused, like predators scenting prey. The air around me seemed to drop several degrees, a sudden, bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the late November chill. This was the chill of primal fear. The hair stood up on my neck. My hand went to my wristwatch again, tracing the numbers. Anything to ground myself, but the numbers blurred, and the watch felt like a cold, useless weight. I couldn't look away. I was a deer caught in headlights, unable to move, unable to scream. And then, another figure joined them, and another. 5, maybe 6 of them now. They moved with a disturbing, disjointed grace, not quite human, a strange, predatory fluidity that made my skin crawl. And then, the masks. Crude, horrifying things made of layered tape, distorted and unsettling, turning their faces into grotesque, featureless voids. One of them, taller than the others, held something that glinted in the faint moonlight, a long, wicked knife. Another, smaller, but with a terrifying stillness, held a handgun. They began to circle the house, a slow, deliberate patrol, like sharks before a feeding frenzy. The dread became a physical weight, pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a delivery. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time, just across the water. And I was the sole, helpless witness. My mouth was dry, tasting of ash. I wanted to scream, to warn them, to do something, but the words were stuck in my throat, choked by terror. And then, chaos erupted. A sharp, shattering sound echoed across the lake, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. A scream, then another, high-pitched, raw with terror. They had broken into the cottage. Through the binoculars, the scene became a sickening tableau of horror. The figures inside, the ones I had just watched laughing, now stumbled, fell, their movements frantic, desperate. I saw the flash of the knife, the glint of the gun. The silhouettes became a maelstrom of violence. Then, a sickening splash of crimson on the window pane, dark against the warm light within. Then another, and another. The screams were no longer distinct, but a unified, guttural cry of agony that carried across the water, thin and horrifying, a sound that would forever claw at the edges of my memory. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I was watching a slaughter, and I was helpless, utterly, horrifyingly helpless. It brought me back to the scent of smoke, the heat, the primal, unspeakable terror of childhood memories I couldn't quite touch. Memories of a fire, of things that shouldn't be, of a fear that had haunted me ever since. The mark, the curse, whatever it was, it had found me again. Panic, cold and sharp, set in. My breath hitched, shallow and quick, sweat dampening my palms. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a deafening drum in my ears. I needed to move. I needed to run, but I was frozen, locked in place, my body refusing to acknowledge the need to flee. I had no phone service, no internet, no way to call for help. I was cut off, isolated, utterly alone, and then she turned, one of the masked figures, the female one I had noticed earlier. Her crude tape mask, a terrifying parody of a human face, shifted, slowly, deliberately, her head tilted, as if listening, or perhaps just to get a better angle. And then, through the binoculars, her gaze, or where I imagined her eyes to be behind the tape, locked on me. The sheer malice in that stare, even from across the dark water, was unmistakable. It wasn't a glance. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition. My blood ran cold. She saw me. My breath hitched. A ragged gasp caught in my throat. My mind raced with panicked questions, each one more horrifying than the last. How? How could she have seen me in the dark? Did they know I was here? Had they known all along? The female intruder tilted her head again, almost playfully. A macabre, silent joke. And then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted a hand and she waved. The world seemed to drop out from under me. I jerked back as if physically struck, the binoculars clattering from my numb fingers, bouncing off the deck railing before hitting the rough wood with a dull thud. The sound was swallowed by the vast, oppressive silence. I stumbled backward, knocking over the small table on the deck, the empty beer bottles crashing to the ground with a cascade of tinkling glass. Inside the house, Buster, startled by the noise, let out a sharp, surprised bark, then another, his high-pitched yip slicing through the terrifying quiet. He heard it too, the breaking of the peace. The female intruder, her blood-soaked mask gleaming faintly in the moonlight, was still standing there, still waving. A slow, chilling motion. My chest tightened, a vice-like grip stealing my breath. They saw me, and they were coming. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my gut. "Buster!" I choked out, stumbling back into the house, my legs suddenly responding to the primal command to flee. I grabbed him, his warm, solid weight a momentary comfort against the rising tide of terror. He whimpered, sensing my fear. I fumbled with the locks, slamming the heavy wooden door shut, throwing the deadbolt, latching the chain, then the back door, the side door, every window. My hands trembled, slick with cold sweat, as I worked, my mind screaming, but it was pointless. I knew it. They were relentless. I had seen them. These things didn't stop. They didn't tire. They just came. And they did. Through the window facing the lake, I saw the impossible. Two dark figures, barely visible against the inky water, stroking through the freezing lake, their movements smooth, silent, inhumanly fast. And the largest one, a hulking shadow, was already halfway across, paddling a stolen canoe, a dark, primitive shape gliding effortlessly over the water. They were not just coming, they were hunting, and they were almost here. My breath hitched, my mind raced. No escape. The house, my supposed sanctuary, was now a trap. a mausoleum. I gripped Buster tightly, his small body trembling against mine. I had to get out. We had to get out. My eyes darted around the dim living room, then down the hall to the basement door. A last resort, a crawl space, a prayer. By the time I wrestled with the old, stiff basement door, its hinges groaning like an ancient beast, I could hear them upstairs, a soft, scraping sound at the back door, then a louder thud, and finally the unmistakable, splintering crack of wood as the lock gave way. They were in. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed through the house, too loud, too close. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I dragged Buster down the creaking wooden steps, the darkness swallowing us. The basement was damp, smelling of earth and mildew, filled with the shadowy forms of forgotten furniture and dusty boxes. In the dim, ambient light filtering from the small ground-level window, I saw it, an old claw hammer, lying forgotten on a workbench, its head dull but heavy. My hand closed around the wooden handle, the familiar weight a strange comfort, a desperate promise of resistance. Above me, the footsteps grew louder. More footsteps. They were spreading out, searching. And then, the unmistakable creak of the basement door, slowly opening at the top of the stairs. A sliver of light, then swallowed again by the shadows. They were coming down. I backed into the deepest corner of the basement, pulling Buster behind me, whispering frantic reassurances to him, more for my own sake than his. The heavy footsteps descended, slow, deliberate. Each thud on the wooden steps was a hammer blow against my eardrums. I could hear their ragged breathing, a low, guttural sound, like a predatory animal. The air grew colder, the oppressive chill of their presence a physical entity. One of them, I could tell by the heavy dragging footsteps, was coming for the far side of the basement, near the small, ground-level window. A loose board, I remembered, always covered that window, a flimsy barrier against the elements, a flimsy barrier against them. And then, the board shifted, a faint groan of wood, then a splintering crack. A dark shape filled the opening, not the window, a space where the window used to be, ripped out, torn open. My breath hitched. Another one. They were everywhere. The heavy footsteps drew closer, slow, methodical, like a clock ticking down to my last second. I could see the hulking outline now, the dark, featureless mass of the tape mask, the glint of something metallic in its hand, the knife. It was almost within reach. My grip tightened on the hammer, my knuckles white. This wasn't a choice. It was pure primal instinct. Survive, protect Buster. When it was within arm's reach, a monstrous shadow in the gloom, I swung, all my strength, all my terror, all the accumulated rage and fear of a lifetime spent running from things that shouldn't be. The hammer flew, a blur in the darkness, a desperate arc of survival. It struck its head with a sickening thud, a wet, yielding sound. I felt the jarring impact travel up my arm, vibrating through the bones of my hand. The creature stumbled, a low choke sound escaping from behind the mask. The hammer had embedded itself. I didn't stop to think. There was no time for thought, no room for hesitation. Just instinct. I scrambled forward, pushing past the staggering, silent figure, scrambling through the jagged shards of the broken window, the icy November air hitting my face like a slap. My hands and forearms scraped against the rough wood, the sharp edges of the broken glass, stinging trails of blood left behind. But I didn't feel it. Not then. All I felt was the desperate need to run, to survive. Buster, surprisingly nimble, followed me through the narrow opening, whining softly. And then we were out, into the woods. The woods were a labyrinth of shadows and noise, a dark, breathing entity that offered no sanctuary. Every crack of a dry branch sounded like a gunshot, jolting my already frayed nerves. Every rustle of leaves was a phantom whisper, a sign that they were still there, still pursuing. The earthy scent of damp leaves and pine needles filled my nostrils, mingling with the faint, coppery tang of blood from my scraped palms. My feet, unheeding of the pain, stumbled over gnarled roots and jagged rocks, the textures of the forest floor cutting into my bare soles. The cold air, a cruel, biting wind, stung my throat with every ragged gasp, and the oppressive darkness seemed to press closer with each desperate step, swallowing any hint of safety. Adrenaline surged through me, a raw, burning fire in my veins, urging my aching legs to keep moving, to push beyond the pain, beyond the exhaustion. The icy wind tore at my skin, numbing my fingers, making it harder to grip the hammer still clutched in my hand, a useless weapon now against an invisible enemy. Each step felt like a gamble, the darkness concealing unseen obstacles that threatened to trip me up, to send me sprawling into the cold, unforgiving earth. Behind me, the faint crunch of leaves and the snapping of twigs signaled their relentless pursuit, driving me deeper into the unforgiving wilderness. My thoughts spiraled, a dizzying mix of desperation and the primal instinct to survive at any cost. This was my life, running, always running, from the things that clawed at the edges of reality, from the things that found me, always. No matter how far I went, I ran until my legs burned, until the icy wind felt like knives against my face, until my lungs screamed for air. Buster, remarkably, kept pace, his smaller body a dark blur beside me, his panting breath a frantic rhythm in the oppressive silence. He was my anchor, my reason. I wouldn't let him go. At one point, stumbling blindly, I collided with something solid, a wall, an old hunting cabin, barely standing, its walls riddled with holes and covered in thick, green moss, as if the forest itself was trying to reclaim it, to swallow it whole. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and rot, a suffocating embrace of decay. Broken furniture lay scattered across the dirt floor, splintered planks, rusted springs. A shattered window, gaping like a wound, let in the icy wind, carrying with it the whispers of the night. Cobwebs hung from the corners like grotesque decorations, shimmering faintly in the oppressive gloom, and the floorboards creaked ominously under my weight, each groan a potential betrayal. It wasn't much, just a shell, but in that moment, in that desolate, unforgiving wilderness, it was shelter. It felt like my only hope. My hands, numb with cold and shaking with terror, fumbled with the broken furniture, dragging pieces of splintered wood and rusted metal across the doorway, barricading myself inside. I gripped the hammer, its dull head a cold, heavy weight in my trembling hand. My lifeline. Buster whined, pressing himself against my leg. We were trapped. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time lost all meaning in that wretched cabin. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating, broken only by my ragged breathing and the thumping of my own frantic heart. Every rustle of leaves, every groan of the ancient wood, sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. Were they still out there? Had they given up? Or were they just waiting? Patient, predator and prey. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the darkness, but the images of the masked figures, their tape-distorted faces, their chilling wave, were burned behind my eyelids. Then, a sound, a soft, deliberate knock, 3 slow, distinct taps on the cabin wall, just outside the barricaded door. Tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. It was too precise, too deliberate. They were out there. They had found me. The same old story, always finding me. like the whispers in the walls that time, or the unnatural silence that preceded the shifting of shadows. My paranoia, my constant companion, flared into full-blown terror. My grip on the hammer tightened until my fingers ached. Was it them, or was I finally losing it? The lines between reality and nightmare had always been blurred for me, a direct consequence of everything I'd seen, everything I'd survived. But this felt too real, too intentional. They were playing with me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in that freezing, decrepit cabin, the sound of those 3 taps echoing in the cavern of my mind, repeating, a chilling lullaby of dread. Buster, surprisingly quiet, seemed to sense the danger. His body pressed tight against mine, a small, warm comfort against the bone-deep cold. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into their forms, every whisper of the wind a taunt. By morning, bruised and bloodied, my clothes torn, my body racked with shivers, I dragged myself and Buster out of the cabin. The woods, though still ominous, felt less immediately threatening in the pale, gray light of dawn. I stumbled through the trees, pushing through the undergrowth, until, finally, gloriously, I saw it, the black ribbon of the road. I flagged down the first car that came along, a rusty sedan driven by a man whose face was a mask of bewildered concern. He took one look at me, the wild eyes, the blood, the shaking, and didn't ask questions, just sped off, taking me straight to the nearest police station. I told them everything, the lake, the distant cottage, the masked figures, the slaughter, the chase, the hammer. The words tumbled out, frantic, desperate, laced with the raw terror of the night. They listened, their faces polite, but their eyes held the familiar, dismissive skepticism, the same look I'd seen before, countless times, the crazy guy look. When they searched my mom's house, they found the masked intruder I'd killed in the basement. It was a man, they said, a local from a neighboring town, known for petty crimes. The hammer was still embedded in his skull. His face was indeed obscured by layers of tape, crude and unsettling. But the others, the swimming figures, the canoeist, the ones who had waved, they were gone. No trace, no bodies from the cottage across the lake, no broken glass, no blood, no signs of forced entry, just a missing canoe. Later found drifting aimlessly by the lakeshore, and severed phone lines, my own handiwork. I realized with a sickening jolt, done in a moment of panic desperation to cut off their escape, to frame them, the evidence, they said, painted a clear picture. The dead man in my mom's basement, the missing local cottage owner, presumed dead, the severed phone lines, all of it twisted into a narrative I couldn't escape. A story of a lone, unhinged man, hallucinating, snapping, murdering. Now, I sit in a jail cell, accused of slaughtering 4 people. Buster, bless his loyal heart, was taken to a local shelter. I begged them to let me keep him, offered anything, but they just shook their heads with sympathetic smiles that felt like condescending sneers. For his own safety, they said, for my sanity, the real killers are still out there. I know it. I feel it in my bones, and they know where I am. This morning, a letter arrived. It came through the official prison mail, stamped and scanned, ostensibly safe, but I knew better. It was a childish scrawl on blood-red construction paper, the letters cut from magazines, glued haphazardly onto the page. Rootin' for you, we miss you. The signature was the kicker, strips of masking tape, crisscrossed, unmistakably familiar. The same crude, horrifying material they had used for their masks. The letter sent shivers down my spine, a cold, cloying dread that seeped into my very marrow. It wasn't just a taunt, it was a promise. A cruel reminder that they were watching, that their reach extended even here, into the supposed safety of these concrete walls. My hands trembled as I reread it, the childish scrawl and the strips of masking tape searing themselves into my mind. A brand of terror, a cold sweat broke out across my skin, the weight of their message pressing down on me like a physical force. What did they mean by "we miss you"? Were they waiting for me to be released? Or would they find a way to strike sooner? The walls around me felt thinner, less secure. Paranoia, my oldest friend, crept in, turning every distant sound into a potential threat, every shadow into their faceless forms. My lawyer insists the letter is a prank, a sick joke from some deranged local. But I know better. I can still see their faces, the tape wrinkling, grinning as they waved. As I await trial, the fear lingers. They know where I am. They're still out there. And sometimes, late at night, when the prison goes quiet, when the guards are on their rounds and the silence stretches, I hear a faint tapping on the walls of my cell. Soft, deliberate. 3 slow, distinct knocks. Tap, tap, tap. A message only I can understand. Whether it's my mind unraveling, finally succumbing to the horrors I've witnessed, or their reach extending even further. Their game continuing, I can't tell. But one thing is certain, this isn't over. It will never be over. And I have a terrible feeling that, even if I get out, I'm just running from one cage into another. The phone felt cold and slick in my trembling hand. The receiver an alien weight against my ear. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound clawing its way up my throat. On the other end, the raspy, broken glass voice of the junkman dissolved into a sound that wasn't human. A sound that started as a low chuckle and then bloomed into a terrible, echoing peal of laughter that seemed to claw its way out of the very wiring of the house. It wasn't mirth, it was a predator's satisfaction, a final, guttural pronouncement of ownership. Insufficient currency, the voice had croaked, and the words, once dismissed as a macabre joke, now resonated with the chill of absolute, bone-deep truth. The laughter deepened, expanding, filling the room, filling my head, a sound that promised not just ruin, but an eternity of hollow emptiness. My fingers tightened, knuckles white, until the plastic began to creak under the pressure. A desperate, futile attempt to crush the sound, to crush the truth. My eyes darted around the quiet living room, as if the shadows themselves might be laughing with her, a cold, insidious dread seeping into my marrow. This wasn't like the things I'd outrun, the shadows that stalked the lonely roads, or the whispers that clung to cursed places. This was a price extracted, a debt called in, and the dawning horror was that I, Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, had paid it willingly, one damn sliver at a time. It had all started, as these things always did, with something mundane, something small, a nuisance that I just wanted to disappear. It had been a few weeks, maybe a month, since I'd pulled into this anonymous corner of the city, another temporary haven in a long line of them. The house I'd rented, a cramped 2-bedroom with a perpetually dripping faucet and a view of a neighbor's overgrown yard, was just a place to park my worn leather jacket and lay my head for a few months. I'd picked up a night shift at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of job that suited me, quiet, solitary, easily forgotten. It allowed me to blend, to be another ghost in the machine, which was exactly how I liked it. My immediate neighbor, a woman named Cardinal. I never did figure out if that was her given name or some kind of self-appointed title, was the kind of person who radiated a specific, cloying sort of warmth that always set my teeth on edge. She was a self-proclaimed Earth Mother type, all organic vegetables and rainbow flags, with a yard that was less a garden and more a wild, untamed ecosystem of weeds, scattered kids' toys, and what she proudly called found crystals that looked suspiciously like common river rocks. I'd seen enough of humanity to know that kind of open-heartedness was either a profound weakness or a carefully constructed facade, usually both. I kept my distance, content with the occasional nod, a grunted reply to her overly cheerful greetings, and the stray tomato she'd sometimes press into my hand. My old analog wristwatch felt like a small, cold comfort on my wrist, a constant reminder of the relentless forward march of time, unconcerned with human pleasantries. My companion, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix I'd found curled up in a gas station dumpster 3 states back, was a different story. He was a creature of pure, uncomplicated loyalty, a warm weight at the foot of my bed, a silent sentinel who somehow understood my need for solitude. He didn't judge, didn't ask questions, and his presence was the one sliver of genuine, uncomplicated good I still allowed into my perpetually guarded existence. He was a silent rebuke to my cynicism, a reminder that some things were still worth protecting. He'd usually be curled up on the threadbare rug near my desk, a low rumble in his chest, his eyes following me with an unnerving understanding that sometimes made me wonder if he saw more than he let on. Then, Sally arrived. One morning, after a particularly long shift spent stacking pallets of discount electronics, I came home to find a splash of garish nylon blooming like a fungus in Cardinal's already chaotic backyard. A tent, a large multicolored tent, staked firmly into the ground amidst the kale and plastic tricycles. I tried to ignore it. I truly did. My internal monologue, a constant companion, offered up a series of sarcastic observations. Great, she's adopted a vagrant, just what this quiet, utterly forgettable street needed. More character. I told myself it wasn't my business. My business was to blend, to survive, to keep moving when the time came. But the tent was a bright, obnoxious bruise on the landscape of my carefully curated anonymity. My observational skills, honed by years of sniffing out trouble, immediately registered the subtle wrongness. It wasn't just a tent, it was a statement, and it was in my line of sight. Cardinal caught me checking my mailbox one afternoon, her smile a little too wide, a little too innocent. "Kids camping outside?" I asked, feigning casual curiosity, my voice flat. I saw the glint in her eye, the slight flush on her cheeks, and knew instantly she'd been waiting for me to ask. "Oh, that's my friend Sally," she chirped, the syllables saccharine sweet. "She's just staying a few days till she gets back on her feet." A muscle twitched in my jaw. "Uh-huh," I managed, the skepticism probably etched onto my face like a roadmap. I could feel the familiar knot of dread coiling in my gut. A few days was always code for indefinite stay, possible property devaluation, guaranteed headache. Every time someone said, "just a few days in my life," it ended with blood or fire or worse. It dragged me back to the unspoken specter of Sycamore Grove, to the insidious way normalcy could rot from the inside out. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, tracing the cool metal of my watch, a grounding mechanism against the rising tide of unease. Cardinal, oblivious or uncaring, barreled on. "It's just a few days. Leo, she lost her job, but she'll find a place. She's a good woman." "Right," I muttered, pulling out my utility bill and retreating. Good women, in my experience, were just as likely to carve you up and wear your skin as any other kind of monster. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. The taste of ash was still in my mouth. A few days bled into a week bled into a few weeks. The tent didn't just stay, it expanded. Piles of what could only be described as urban detritus began to accumulate around it. Broken electronics, rusted bicycle frames, shattered mirrors, twisted metal, deflated sports balls. A whole damn menagerie of modern junk. Sally, a woman with a perpetually damp-looking face and eyes that darted around like a cornered mouse, started showing up more often. She introduced herself one morning when I was letting Buster out. She claimed to be an artist, making sculptures out of found objects. "I take other people's junk and I make it into something beautiful," she'd mumbled, nervously wringing her hands. Her voice was thin, reedy, like a forgotten instrument. The smell of stale cigarettes and something vaguely damp clung to her. "Do you have a favorite animal? I could make you one, if you like, for your yard." I looked at her, then at the skeletal remains of what she claimed was a crane, crafted from bent coat hangers and plastic bottles. Why would I put garbage in my yard? My internal voice was sharp, but my external one was carefully neutral. "How's the housing search going, Sally?" She sighed, a theatrical puff of air that barely moved the stray wisps of graying hair escaping her perpetually messy bun. Her eyes welled up, and she spoke of social workers and full shelters, a litany of excuses I'd heard 1,000 times from 1,000 different desperate mouths. I felt a familiar pang of something almost like pity, quickly smothered by the pragmatic annoyance. Pity was a weakness, a luxury I couldn't afford. It always led to trouble, always had. It was the same reckless impulse that made me pick up a stray dog or pause when I heard a cry for help. My fatal flaw: I tried the city, the mayor's office, the housing department, code enforcement. It was like shouting into a void. This was one of those cities, the kind that prided itself on being progressive, which translated, in practice, to letting weeds overtake every park in the name of native plants, and getting rid of loitering laws so indigents could camp out and smoke whatever they pleased on every corner. I envisioned my quiet street becoming a permanent open-air museum of found object art and human despair, my sanctuary compromised. I was stuck with the tent. I was stuck with the whole goddamned menagerie. Then, one day, I saw the signs, tacked to telephone poles, stapled to forgotten fence posts, even stuck to the cracked glass of bus stops. "Junk men will take any junk. Call X6X." I'd glimpsed the figure a few times before, a stooped, almost spectral presence pushing a rickety cart laden with scavenged detritus, old tires, rusted pipes, bits of partially destroyed fences. What the junkman got out of it, I had no idea. No fee listed. That was the strangest part. Usually there was a catch, a hidden charge. My life had taught me there were no free rides. I was outside trying to coax Buster away from a particularly pungent patch of Cardinals compost when I spotted that tattered figure, bent almost double, hammering another one of her crude signs onto a telephone pole at the end of the block. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows, making her seem even more skeletal. A cynical, impulsive thought, born of frustration, bubbled up. "Hey," I called out, my voice rougher than intended. "I got some junk you can take out." I jutted my thumb toward Cardinal's yard, toward the offending tent and its growing collection of urban sculptures. It was meant as a joke, a dark, cynical jest to an anonymous stranger, a release valve for my pent-up annoyance. The junkman paused, the hammer still in her bony hand, and slowly, with an unsettling, almost mechanical slowness, turned to look at me over a shoulder that seemed to be made of coat hangers. That's when I truly saw her. It wasn't a he at all. It was a she, if you could even call her that. Wild, coarse gray hair, the color of dirty snow, framed a face that was more caricature than human. Her skin was a network of deep, leathery wrinkles, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes and her mouth. That truly disturbed me. Her lips were a shocking, unnatural ruby red, a stark splash of color on her cadaverous face. And her head, it wasn't quite right. It was like an owl's head, perched precariously on a neck that seemed too thin, too long, too flexible. I could have sworn that in that moment, it was about to keep turning, like a screw, twisting completely around. A cold shiver, not a physical cold, but a primal wrongness, traced its way down my spine. The air around her seemed to vibrate with a low hum, like an old, failing transformer. Then, those eyes, black, beady, unsettlingly intelligent, shifted from me to the tent in Cardinal's yard. Her head tilted, that unnatural angle once more. She spoke, her voice a dry, rasping sound, like gravel churning in a rusty barrel. The art or the artist? A snort of dark amusement escaped me. The absurdity of it. The morbid humor. Well, I said, leaning against my fence, a sarcastic grin splitting my face. If you can take the artist, please do. Been mucking up my view for a month now. I regretted the words almost immediately, a familiar prickle of my reluctant conscience. But it was too late. The words hung in the air, heavy and dark. I saw Sally's slight figure moving inside the tent, a flash of her silhouette against the nylon. My stomach churned. What the hell did I just say? The junkman just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Then, she fixed those unsettling eyes on me again. Hey, I said, trying to shake off the creeping unease, trying to lighten the mood. How come you call yourself junkman if you're a woman? Her ruby lips curled into something that might have been a smile, or perhaps a rictus of something far older and less pleasant. It didn't reach her eyes. Better for business. No one will call an old woman to haul junk. Fair enough, I thought, and watched her finish hammering the sign, her movements economical and precise. She turned and began pushing her cart down the street, a gaunt, hunched silhouette against the setting sun. The unsettling feeling lingered, a metallic tang in the back of my throat. I told myself it was just a strange old lady, just another peculiar character in a long line of them. But my hand kept going back to my wristwatch, my thumb tracing the worn glass, a nervous tick. A few days later, Buster barked frantically from the living room, startling me awake. I'd been drifting in that hazy half-sleep that often plagued me, a fragmented nightmare of screaming and smoke clinging to the edges of my consciousness. My heart hammered against my ribs. It took a moment for me to orient myself, to realize Buster wasn't barking at a ghost, but at the sound of Cardinal's frantic, desperate cries. "Sally, Sally, where are you?" Her voice was raw, cracking with something akin to panic. I peered out my window. Cardinal was standing in the middle of her unruly yard, spinning in slow, frantic circles, her arms thrown wide. The tent was still there, a deflated, brightly colored lump. The art was still there too. Sally's grotesque eagle sculpture, with its fan blade wings still poised menacingly towards my porch. But Sally herself was gone, vanished, seemingly into thin air. I felt a surge of unadulterated relief, quickly followed by a dark, uncomfortable twist in my gut. Coincidence, I told myself. She finally packed up and moved on, probably tired of living in a perpetual yard sale. I walked out onto my porch, feigning concern. "Everything all right, Cardinal?" I asked, my voice as neutral as I could make it. Buster, sensing the tension, stayed close to my leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "It's Sally, she's gone." Cardinal wrung her hands. "She just vanished, but she left all her things, her tent, her art." "Maybe she just got worried about winter," I suggested, shrugging. "Left the mess for you to clean up." My words were callous. I knew, but I'd learned long ago that a certain level of callousness was necessary for self-preservation. No, something's wrong. Cardinal's eyes were wide, her face pale. "Did you see the junkman around here? I keep tearing down her posters." "She's bad news. Haven't you heard the rumors?" I shook my head, feigning ignorance. "Rumors? I don't like to speak ill of people," Cardinal began, but her usual moral compass seemed to be wavering under the strain. "But my friend Joan, she said her ex-boyfriend hated her dog and asked the junkman to take it. The next day it disappeared. Poof, gone. And the junkman left him one of those awful sculptures." Cardinal shuddered, pulling her cardigan tighter. "She'll take anything. They say she uses some sort of witchcraft and takes a piece of your soul in exchange for disappearing the junk. There's all these extra terms and conditions written in invisible ink on her flyers. Look at them under a blacklight if you want to freak yourself out." My blood ran cold. "A piece of your soul?" I dismissed it immediately. Witchcraft, invisible ink, hokum, old wives' tales, a metaphor, at best. My cynical mind scoffed at such archaic notions. Still, a faint, unsettling echo of the junkman's voice, the art, or the artist, reverberated in my head. Cardinal kept talking, her voice thin with anxiety. I was going to call the city, but maybe we should just call the junkman to deal with the tent. Cheaper than renting a dumpster, I guess. She trailed off, her gaze lingering on the tent with a mixture of grief and revulsion. Huh, I said, non-committal. Inside, a strange, morbid curiosity was stirring. Later that evening, after the moon had climbed high and cast long, skeletal shadows across the street, I found it. Propped against my front step, nestled amongst the dead leaves, was a small, crude sculpture. It was a deer, crafted from twisted wire, bottle caps, and shards of iridescent plastic. It was ugly, strangely unsettling, and undeniably hers. Attached to it, with a single piece of masking tape, was a small, grimy card in cramped, spidery handwriting. It read, "Thanks for your business, junkman." A cold knot tightened in my stomach, a sense of perverse justice mixed with a chilling dread. What a creeper. I picked up the sculpture, its cheap material surprisingly heavy in my hand. The small, red eyes of the deer seemed to stare at me, accusingly. I stuffed the card into my wallet, the phone number on the back, a morbid souvenir. Cardinal eventually cleared away the tent, leaving her yard looking slightly less chaotic, though Sally's art remained. The eagle, particularly, remained poised, its discarded fan blade wings catching the sun at an angle that made it look truly menacing, as if ready to swoop down onto my porch and pluck out my eyes. It was a constant, ugly reminder of what had happened, and of my own dark jest, a constant irritant. I found myself staring at it almost every morning, a low hum of annoyance growing into a full-blown throb behind my eyes. Cardinal, in her misplaced sentimentalism, kept saying it exuded Sally's spirit and that she could decorate her yard however she wished. And that, in itself, was the problem. It was her choice, but it was my view. My piece. I hadn't planned to call the junkman. Not really, but the card was still in my wallet, the number burning a hole through the worn leather. The thought of how easy it had been for Sally to disappear, how effortlessly the nuisance had been removed, it gnawed at me. And that damned eagle, it felt like it was mocking me. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after a near miss with a kid on a skateboard who nearly wiped out Buster and then swore at me, I snapped. My grip on the phone was tight, my thumb hovering over the numbers. It's just garbage. I rationalized. A phone call can't hurt. I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked into a pre-recorded message. The same raspy voice, devoid of human inflection. Leave a message explaining what junk you'd like removed. The fee is merely a small sliver of your soul. I scoffed out loud. Hilarious. A ridiculous, theatrical flourish for a cleaning service. I cleared my throat, forcing a casual tone. Yeah, hi. This is Leo Vance. I'd like to request removal of some art installations from the yard next door. The metal eagle, the crane, all of it. Consider it junk. I hung up quickly, feeling a strange mixture of shame and exhilaration. The next morning, it was gone. Every single piece of Sally's found object art vanished. The yard was still a mess, but the sculptures were nowhere to be seen. No trace, not even a disturbed patch of grass. Whoa! I stared at the empty space, a chilling awe creeping in. It was hokum, sure, but her cleaning powers were undeniably impressive. And I mean, all I had to do was make a phone call. It was just so easy. Too easy. That's when the truly dangerous thought began to take root. What else could she make disappear? I didn't mean to keep calling her. Not really. But once you realize a problem can simply vanish with a single phone call, the temptation becomes a corrosive acid, eating away at your good intentions. 2 doors down, an elderly couple had left 2 hulking, rusted appliances, a washer and a dryer, on their front lawn for months, slowly decaying, attracting rodents, making the whole street look like a junkyard, an eyesore, a blight, a civic menace. I called. They were gone the next morning, replaced by another of those crude, unsettling sculptures on my doorstep. This one a lopsided dog, its eyes made of rusty bolts. Thanks for your business. Then came the panhandlers. At the co-op where I did my occasional grocery shopping, they were a constant fixture, slumped against the brick wall, their signs begging for money, their eyes glazed over. They harassed customers, smelled of stale booze and desperation, and were clearly hurting local business. What were people like that, really, but trash, human refuse? They weren't contributing, they were taking. My hand hovered over the phone again, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This is different. A small, desperate part of my conscience whispered, these are people. But the other part, the cynical, weary part, quickly argued back. They're a menace, a nuisance. They're making things worse for everyone. You're just cleaning up. The guilt was a dull ache, but the pull of convenience, the promise of quiet, was stronger. I called. I asked the junkman to clean them up. The next morning, the spots where they usually sat were empty. Other panhandlers drifted in a few days later, filling the void, their gaunt faces and desperate pleas echoing the ones that had vanished. I called again, and again. Each time, a new sculpture appeared on my step, a grotesque, silent tally of my transactions. A bird with bottle cap feathers, a coiled snake made of bicycle chains, a contorted human figure made of discarded doll's limbs. Each one seemed to pulse with a faint, disturbing energy, their materials whispering of what they once were. The human figures made me nauseous, the subtle twist in my gut growing sharper with each new acquisition. I moved on to other irritants. The unsightly graffiti that appeared on the park wall, scrawled by bored teenagers, defiling public space, gone. The dog owners who let their pets crap on the sidewalk without picking up, leaving landmines for unsuspecting pedestrians, gone. Even the gang of Kia-stealing teens that had been terrorizing the neighborhood, joyriding and causing chaos. One quick phone call and boom, no more stolen cars. Each time, the junk man left her unsettling token, a small, found object animal or figure, always with that chillingly polite note. Thanks for your business, junkman. Everything was great. The neighborhood, once sliding into a slow decay, seemed to be brightening, clearing. My street was quiet. The constant hum of annoyance had faded. My routines felt safer. I almost felt content. Almost, because with each successful transaction, a deeper, colder space opened up inside me, a space where the faint echo of my conscience used to reside. The silence was less peaceful now, more unnerving, like the silence in an empty room after a scream has died. Until yesterday, I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee on my porch, enjoying the rare quiet, when I saw a cardinal marching towards my house, her face a thundercloud. Buster, sensing her agitation, whined softly at my feet. In her hand, clutched tight, was a small, crude sculpture of a dog. It took me a moment, my mind still half asleep, to realize she hadn't brought it from her yard. She'd picked it up off my front step, and attached to it was the junkman's usual grimy card. My blood ran cold. The coffee sloshed over my hand, but I barely felt it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. The junkman. Cardinal's voice was a low growl, utterly devoid of her usual saccharine sweetness. Her eyes, usually so soft, were piercing, filled with a terrible accusation. You've been calling the junkman, haven't you? Leo? My mind raced, trying to formulate a denial, a distraction. Now, hang on, Cardinal. Why does she leave Sally's sculptures for you as a calling card? Did you call her about Sally? Are you the reason Sally disappeared? She took a step closer, her voice rising, sharp with fury. I'm keeping this sculpture. Something to remember her, seeing as all the other art I had of hers out in my yard has gone missing, along with so many other things that, I guess, were junk to you. The implied accusation, the sheer scale of what she knew, hit me like a physical blow. The shame was scalding, immediately overridden by pure, unadulterated panic. She knew. She had the card. If she called first, if she called and told the junk man to take Pomenum Mamisonum. Whatever happens, Cardinal shouted over her shoulder as she stormed off my porch, the dog sculpture clutched tight in her hand. You brought this on yourself. The words echoed in the sudden silence, chilling me to the bone. You brought this on yourself. She was right. Every step, every call, every vanishing act. I stumbled back inside, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic, primal fear. It was her or me. It had to be. It was always a matter of survival. I punched in the junk man's number, my thumb hitting the worn buttons with desperate force. The phone rang. Once, twice. It clicked into the voicemail. Leave a message explaining what junk you'd like removed. The fee is merely a small sliver of your soul. Her, I gasped, my voice barely a whisper, ragged and hoarse. Cardinal, my neighbor. She's causing problems. She's a nuisance. Take her away. My voice broke on the last word. I hung up immediately, slamming the phone down on the table, the plastic vibrating with the force. I stood there, gasping, my chest tight, empty. The air in the room felt thin, suddenly cold. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. Buster whimpered, nudging my leg, his soft fur a shocking contrast to the icy dread coiling inside me. It was her or me. I had to do it. There was no other choice. That was the lie I told myself. That was the lie I clung to, even as the truth gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I barely slept. The next morning, I sat on my porch, eyes gritty, stomach churning. The air was thick with the unspoken. Buster sat beside me, his head resting on my knee, occasionally licking my numb hand. My wristwatch felt heavy, its steady tick-tock a mockery of my frantic thoughts. Then, I saw her. One of Cardinal's kids, a small girl with braids, bounced out of the front door, backpack swinging, and skipped off to the school bus as if everything were normal. My breath caught in my throat. Shit, I totally forgot about her children. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. A few minutes later, Cardinal herself emerged, carrying a watering can, heading towards her garden. Her lips thinned when she noticed me, a tight, angry line. She deliberately looked away, overtly ignoring me, turning her back, still pissed, and also, still very much not disappeared. Why had the junk man not taken her away? The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of birds. My carefully constructed logic began to crumble. I called, leaving several increasingly desperate messages. My voice grew hoarse, my words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent stream. Why hadn't she gone? Had the junkman not received my request? Had Cardinal called her first? Was the curse on me now? Finally, on my fifth call, the phone rang, and a raspy voice actually answered. It was her, the junkman. My stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. Your messages were received, she said, her voice like sandpaper on bone. So what's going on? I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Did Cardinal call first and ask you to junk me? The absurdity of it, even as I spoke the words, was almost comical, if it weren't for the ice in my veins. She has never called this number and never will, replied the raspy voice, utterly devoid of emotion. Okay. Well, can I ask why you didn't carry out my request? The fear was an icy grip around my throat. You have insufficient currency, said the voice, flat and matter-of-fact. Wait, but there's no charge, I exclaimed, a wave of indignation briefly overriding the fear. New fees? Now? But even as the words left my mouth, a memory flashed, the phrase repeated again and again on the voicemail, that I had dismissed each time. A small sliver of your soul? A low chuckle began on the other end, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It started soft, then grew, deepening, expanding, until it filled the phone line, filling my ears, vibrating through the bones of my skull. It didn't sound like an old woman's chuckle at all. It didn't sound remotely human as it explained. There is a charge. Each transaction has a small cost. You have made a number of transactions, Mr. Vance, and now you have insufficient currency. The voice trailed off now, dissolving into those terrible, awful peals of laughter that now seemed to be coming from the walls, from the very air around me, mocking, triumphant, absolute. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. I slammed it down onto the receiver, cutting off the sound, but the laughter echoed in my head, a chilling symphony of my own undoing. I sat there, frozen, the phone still vibrating on the table. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was the silence of a tomb. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound. Insufficient currency. I had dismissed it as a joke, a metaphor, but now it was stark, terrifying reality. Each time, a sliver, each time, a piece. My memories, my empathy, my very essence. Traded for quiet streets, for disappeared annoyances, traded for a fragile, temporary peace. How do I earn back my currency? Is there any way to reverse the charges? The question was a desperate, childish plea into an uncaring void. The answer, I knew, was no. There was no going back. The laughter echoed, a cold wind through a hollow place. Was this the price for surviving Sycamore Grove? For all the times I'd run and survived when others hadn't? Was every step I took, every breath I drew, just another payment towards a debt I didn't even know I owed? The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. I had cleaned up the neighborhood, but in doing so, I had emptied myself. I was the last piece of junk, waiting to be collected, and I had no currency left to pay my way out of it. Buster nudged my hand, a warm, insistent presence, a stark reminder of the fragile, precious thing I had left to lose. My watch ticked, a relentless march towards an unknown, horrifying reckoning. Character count, 9 to 967.